Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Was Banished and Tsunade Left With Him. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
With their owner's head resting on a fist propped on a chair arm, chocolate brown eyes observed the group of people gathered around the table. The Council of Konoha was made up of chiefs of clans and influential Konoha residents. They were accompanied by Sandame's old comrades Homura and Kaharu, as well as Danzo, a talented diplomat, crippled warhawk, and, above all, a vexing irritant to the Hokage and Konoha's ideals. Of course, without these three, the village elders, or, as Tsunade referred to them, the village ingrown toenails, no assembly of the useless would be complete. Grandpa, why in the world did you ever establish the Council of Konoha? After giving it some thought, Tsunade sighed quietly, recalling that it had been necessary to make sure the young village would survive its founding. When it was created, it had been a necessary evil since Hashirama needed as much assistance as possible due to the amount of work required to create the village. Because of his character, he also let the clans and civilians make it up so that a greater range of issues could be resolved and various groups could have a say in the creation of Konoha. Regretfully, they had dug deep and drafted laws to keep the council intact and able to retain as much authority as possible by the time it was deemed unnecessary and was about to be dissolved. Hashirama tried his best to curtail that power, but like himself, they were cunning manipulators. Their Konoha skills were a source of pride for either Senju or Uchiha, and he had to provide enough to satisfy them. As a result, Tobirama, Hiruzen, and Minato had to contend with progressively avaricious and hungry individuals who sought to overthrow the Hokage and increase their own and their clan's authority. The old warhawk Danzo was the worst. He was like an incurable tumor of Konoha, always spreading, infecting wherever he could. His disease spreading through the trees would, causing death and decay wherever it came into contact. The woman's bored brown eyes turned to the elderly woman as Kohaku's voice interrupted her thoughts. Tsunade. Sama. What is it, Kohaku? Have the hens finally stopped clucking about inconsequential nonsense and ended the pointless pissing contests? Can the ninja actually get to work now? She asked. A number of clan heads laughed, and Chao's deep laugh reverberated throughout the meeting room, followed by Sume's barking laughter, while the civilians frowned at her. Shibi's Kakaichu buzzed lightly, as if pleased by her words, while Shikaku and Inoichi simply grinned and laughed, respectively. She observed that a few of the clan leaders, especially Hiashi, were frowning as well, realizing the jab at him and the others. Following Tsunade's comments, Homura attempted to restore some semblance of order to the room by saying, "Yes. Well, on to business." Tsunade straightened up and folded her hands on the table, looking more professional than ever as she said, "Of course." Kohaku picked up a little pile of papers and started looking through them, nodding to the Godem Hokage. She was aware that their plan was stepping on thin ice with the Hokage, so she needed to exercise caution in how they approached this. However, failing to do so would result in a furious Uchiha Itachi blaming her, Danzo, and Homura for the circumstances surrounding the Uchiha massacre. Furthermore, Konoha was powerless to stop him from exacting his revenge on them. Therefore, it was best for them to placate the man before he pursued them. Our first order of business deals with the proposal of a man wishing to start a new, shinobi-only bookstore, she said out loud after adjusting her reading glasses and examining the first piece of paperwork. Tsunade's years of experience allowed her to maintain the appearance of attentiveness while the council reviewed the day's agenda. It mostly involved personal complaints and grievances that fell under the council's purview and were either civilian or minor ninja matters. So she just needed to look attentive, and she could let her thoughts wander without concern. She had been a high-ranking shinobi for years prior to herself imposed exile, so she was extremely skilled at this. Even so, she was able to gain a lot of experience while listening to Shizune, her apprentice and assistant, worry and stress over their financial situation. The Godem Hokage's thoughts strayed to Uzumaki Naruto, the blonde who had initially persuaded her to return to the village, as the council discussed various orders of business. He had succeeded in removing the barrier that surrounded her heart, enabling her to trust and care for someone else once more, despite her initial dislike of the blonde. She saw the will of fire, if you will, in him, the unbreakable spirit and heart of her little brother Nawaki and her lover Dan. She had been thinking a lot lately about whether she should have survived or if she would have had a son or nephew like him. She grinned to herself, knowing that if she had a son, he would have been just like the active, loving boy she loved. She even began to like his nickname for her, Ba-chan, and she began to see the young shinobi as a grandson, just as Sarutobi Sensei had done before her. The boy seemed capable of bringing out the best in you and making you love him despite your own feelings if you gave him the chance. Pardon of Uchiha Sasuke. Hearing those words jolted Tsunade out of her reverie, and the council erupted, eyes shifting to Kohaku. While the majority of the ninja were furious at the idea of pardoning a traitor, the civilians were applauding for such an event to occur. Tsunade yelled, "Enough!" and the room suddenly fell silent. Despite her reputation as a gambling Richie, Tsunade was still the Hokage and possessed the strength to crush skulls the way most people crush roaches under their shoes. And regardless of who used it, both civilians and ninja respected such strength. Kohaku realized that the emphasis on the word loyal was not by chance when Tsunade asked, "Now, why may I ask, are we even considering pardoning a traitor to Konoha, one who planned to run to Orochimaru, the murderer of the Sandaime Hokage, and whose defection caused severe injury to 6 loyal ninja?" With caution, Kohaku said, "Well, Hokage Sama, it seems that there were extenuating circumstances involving the curse seal he had received from Orochimaru and its effects on him." "Such as?" Tsunade inquired in a quiet, low voice, but she had the air of a predator pursuing its unwary prey, crouching and poised to strike at the right time. "Well, exams of both seal and child have shown that its effects on his body and mental state are quite pronounced." Kohaku responded, and Tsunade raised an eyebrow responded, "I'd heard that it had been effectively sealed by the boy's Junin sensei not a couple days after he had received it. From my understanding, it takes longer than that for pronounced effects to be had." "Oh. Of course, Hokage Sama." Kohaku agreed, and Tsunade nodded as she. "And that the seal placed by one Hitaki Kakashi was based around the willpower of the person the seal was on. Which means that for the seal Orochimaru gave him to have affected the boy at all, much like it did during his battle against Genin Uzumaki Naruto at the Valley of the End, then he must be weak-willed. Something a shinobi should not be. However, his contact with one Uchiha Itachi in Tanzaku town had negative effects on the mind of the boy, and weakened his will enough for the seal to take advantage." Kohaku stated, and Tsunade responded, "But Uchiha Sasuke should not have been in Tanzaku town in the first place to meet up with his brother, since he had no permission to leave the village at that time. He left of his own free will to locate and confront Uchiha Itachi, an act most would consider suicidal, at best. The fact the child got away with but a broken arm and placed under the Tsukiyomi is a miracle. Of course, Hokage Sama, that has been taken into account, and while we wish to pardon Uchiha Sasuke, we also want to revoke his rights and privileges as a shinobi, leaving him a civilian. We will also have a tracking seal placed on him to ensure he does not attempt to defect to Orochimaru again." Kohaku replied, and Tsunade looked at the elderly. She inquired, "Why do you care so much for one genin?" Tsunade's rapacious brown eyes turned to Danzo as he explained, "Because, Hokage Sama," adding, "the Uchiha's Sharingan is too valuable for us to lose, and having him locked away will cause such a resource to be lost forever." "I believe that would be no great loss," Hiashi replied, and Danzo glanced at the Hyuga and replied, "You would believe that, Hiashi Sama. The feud between the Hyuga and the Uchiha clans is well recorded both before and after the creation of the village. However, just because you believe that, does not make it true. I do. All it does is create arrogant and untrustworthy shinobi, who believe their personal wants deserve to be placed above the good of the village. A belief that is not tempered by the civilians, nor unfortunately by the previous Hokage, as his actions at the last Chunin exam showed." Inoichi replied, and Danzo turned to the blonde man while asking, "How do you mean, Inoichi Sama?" The village elders were given a moment's smirk when Inoichi said, "I mean that the Uchiha was allowed to be over an hour late, something that must not be tolerated, and most certainly would not have been if it had been Shikamaru-kun, Gara-san, or especially Uzumaki-san." The civilian council expressed their opinions about the Uzumaki boy in a blunt manner. Tsunade screamed, "Quiet," and turned to face the elders. "So, you wish for Uchiha Sasuke to be rendered a civilian of Konoha, with a tracking seal placed on him to make sure he doesn't attempt to escape again, so he can reproduce and give us more little Uchihas?" she asked. When she noticed their nods, she sighed and closed said, "Very well. Despite my best judgment, I shall allow it. Only on the condition that he submits to proper psychological evaluation, then receives the emotional and psychological help he needed but was denied after the Uchiha massacre. Also, I want Jiraiya to properly seal that horrid cursed mark, and to seal off all his chakra but that which his body requires to survive so that he will offer less of a threat to others." "Now, about the Kyuubi child," Danzo said after they nodded in agreement. Even the shinobi started to perspire a little as a result of the killing intent emanating from the Hokage. and the civilians started to gasp for air. It made Danzo's chest feel constricted, and when he heard the female Hokage ask, "What about Uzumaki Naruto?" a shiver went down his spine, as if someone were dancing on his grave. With a low murmur starting to come from the civilians, Danzo stated, according to Anbu reports from the Valley of the End, there was a large amount of the Kyuubi's chakra permeating the area shortly after the battle. A necessary evil for Uzumaki Naruto to combat the cursed mark wielded by Uchiha Sasuke. It was no accident, nor was it a sign of the seal weakening, Danzo. It was a defense mechanism placed there by the Yondaime Hokage in case of emergencies to protect Naruto and ensure his continued existence, as well as ensure the Kyuubi does not escape upon his death. Tsunade responded, and Danzo inquired, "How can we be so sure of that?" "Because the Yondaime wrote that down himself within the scroll bearing the Shikifuin, and has been supported by his teacher, Jiraiya. If we cannot trust the work of two of the greatest seal masters to ever exist, then who shall we trust? Homura and Kohaku? Or maybe you and your Root?" Tsunade inquired, and Danzo grinned. "You know that Root was disbanded by the foolish Sandaime Hokage years." "Bullshit, Danzo. No one honestly believes that, especially not the Junin who see Anbu in Konoha bearing the Ni kanji upon their mask." Tsunade responded in Danzo's scowl. "We are not here to discuss a defunct organization, Tsunade. Sama. We are here to discuss Uzumaki Naruto and the danger he presents to Konoha. Which we both know is none, Danzo. As stated before, the seal placed on Naruto was a collaboration of both Jiraiya and Namikaze Minato, two of the greatest seal masters to ever exist. To doubt the seal is to doubt them, something I refuse to allow happen. Minato's genius is touted in the streets by shinobi and civilian alike, and that seal is a work of that genius." Tsunade responded, and Danzo responded, "But it is 12 years old. Surely degeneration can happen to even the greatest seals. That is why Jiraiya, Minato's teacher and a seal master of his caliber, inspects it every so often to ensure that degeneration has not happened. If such a thing has happened, then Jiraiya can easily repair it before it becomes dangerous to Konoha. And Uzumaki Naruto is one of the most loyal shinobi to ever live, so we do not need to worry about him being a threat to us either." Tsunade responded, and Danzo's jaw tight was locked before he was able to enter. "How can we be so assured of his loyalty, Tsunade, Sama?" a civilian asked, and Tsunade responded, "Because he has never once shown any sign of betraying Konoha. Unlike Uchiha Sasuke. He has protected us from danger time and again, even doing so since birth by holding back the Kyuubi. He wishes to have acknowledgement from the people of Konoha, to earn their respect. If he were not loyal to our village and its people, then he would not have such hopes. Only the Inuzuka clan can rival his loyalty to our village." "But, enough," Tsunade growled, adding, "We are not here to discuss Uzumaki Naruto, a loyal Konoha shinobi who, along with the rest of a team put together by Shikamaru and aided by the children of the late Kazekage, went above and beyond the call of duty and accomplished a mission that would have given Junin trouble." Tsunade's eyes narrowed dangerously as she questioned, "And why exactly are you bringing him up?" Danzo calmly stated, "I am merely concerned with the safety of Konoha and its people, as is the daimyo. Merely because the day after the Uchiha incident, I sent the daimyo the reports gathered by Anbu and asked for his input. He says that he agrees with Kohaku, Homura, and myself on the subject of Genin Uzumaki Naruto. I just hoped that we could get you to see the light concerning the Jinchuriki, but unfortunately it seems your personal feelings for the child are clouding your judgment." "How dare you?" Everyone's attention was abruptly drawn to the dark-haired Inuzuka matriarch, including a startled Tsunade who had just gotten up and appeared on the verge of jumping at the village elders, and tearing their throats out with her teeth. Sume felt her hackles stand up as she growled, "What do you mean, Inuzuka-san?" Danzo said, "I mean that you have gone behind our leader's back and undermined her authority. For the good of the village only, Inuzuka-san." Danzo responded, but this time Shikaku spoke up and replied, "Bullshit. From what I've seen and heard from my son, Uzumaki Naruto is not a danger to our village nor its people. He has been nothing but loyal to both in a situation that most would have long since betrayed up, if the reports and rumors have heard." Loyal, with all those pranks he's pulled?" a civilian asked, and Shibi responded, "Observation by both myself and my clan seemed to indicate that those pranks were merely a cry for attention in an environment where he was all but denied acknowledgement of any form. For a child in their most formulative stage of life, such acts are normally seen as cruel to the point of emotional abuse, but it seems they were overlooked in his case. The fact he only pulled harmless jokes upon the people who denied him his very right to exist speaks highly of his mental and emotional fortitude." That is but your sympathetic opinion, Aburame-san. Kohaku replied, and went on to say, however, it seems that the daimyo isn't quite willing to take complete control from the Hokage and council. He has agreed to endorse whatever decision the council reaches. But seeing as we are not completely heartless, we won't ask for execution. Homura questioned, all those in favor of the banishment of Genin Uzumaki Naruto from the ranks of Konohagakure. As Tsunade snarled, how very generous of you. As the village elders, Hiashi, two of the minor clans, and the entire civilian half of the council raised their hands, Tsunade felt her skin turn pale and her heart sink. That in itself sealed the doomed blonde's doom. And all those against? Shibi, Shikaku, Inoichi, Sume, Shuza, and the other minor clan members all raised their hands, including Tsunade. By a vote of 13-7, the council, with the full backing of the daimyo of Hino Kuni, do hereby banish Genin Uzumaki Naruto. He is to be outside the walls of Konohagakure no Sato within the next 72 hours, or he will be considered a threat to the village and executed as one, Kohaku said, forcing herself to hide her pleased smile as she stood up. As he stood up, Danzo declared, with this vote, the business of the council is finished for the day, and are excused. After the Kyuubi child was expelled from the village of Konohagakure, the civilian side of the council, Hiashi, and the two minor clans all stood as one. Their chests swelled with pride. We run things around here now, was the obvious message that Kohaku, Homura, and Danzo gave the Godem Hokage as they marched out, and then they left themselves. As he stood up, Shibi remarked, I apologize, Hokage. Sama. Uzumaki Naruto was a devoted nin of Konoha, and it is a tragedy to lose one so devoted for a traitor. Before leaving Tsunade and Sume alone, the minor clan head and the Ino Shika Sho trio expressed similar feelings. I'm sorry for this, Hokage. Sama. I must say that I've grown rather fond of the blonde pup, and the tale of how he defeated Kiba in the prelims of the Chunin exam caused me to damn near wet myself with laughter, Sume said, sighing as she turned to face the dejected Tsunade. After their leader remained silent for a few moments, Sume turned to ask what was wrong, but she stopped when she saw the expression on the blonde Hokage's face. What are you going to do about him? She asked, looking to the table. The Sandame used to get one like that when he was planning to be cunning, especially when he knew it would embarrass those who believed they had outwitted him. The Inuzuka felt a chill go up her spine, and she suspected that whatever was going to happen would rock the village to its foundations. Sume. Yes, Hokage. Sama. Are you pondering what I'm pondering? I believe so, Hokage. Sama. And if I indeed am, then all I can say is, I want in, Sume said, slowly matching the woman's smile. Good, Sume. Chan. Now, all we need is Shizune, and our plan can begin, Tsunade said, grinning as she looked at the Inuzuka's head. Sume felt a chill go up her spine once more, and she somehow knew that this would be something that future generations would remember. In a pristine white hospital room, Naruto was lying on his bandaged belly with his arms spread across the railings of the bed, snoozing quietly and drooling next to his face. During the night, as the blonde twisted and turned to get comfortable, blankets were kicked on the floor at the foot of the bed. Sakura, who stood next to the bed, appeared uneasy about her friend's condition. Softly, Sakura nudged his shoulder and said, Naruto. The blonde responded by muttering something in jest and pathetically waving his arm to get her to go. Sakura spoke a little louder and more firmly, Naruto. Her discomfort was replaced by annoyance at Naruto's apparent deep sleep. He responded with another wave of his arm and a more irritated gibberish. Sakura jabbed his shoulder and said, Naruto. Her discomfort had mostly been replaced by annoyance. Na, Kura. Chan, Seipan, was the blonde's barely understandable reply. Ak, Ader. He said, waving his arm once more. As Sakura turned to leave Naruto to his well-earned rest, she glanced back at his prone form and said, by the way. Thank you, Naruto. Sakura sighed and gave Naruto's bandaged head a gentle pat, her frown giving way to a gentle smile as she said, alright then. I'll go see if Sasuke-kun is up to having visitors yet. What's this feeling in my stomach? She thought as she sighed and leaned back on the door before leaving the room. It's somewhat similar to how I feel about Sasuke-kun, but not quite. Perhaps it's thanks to Naruto for bringing Sasuke-kun back. Or it might be the same way you would feel about a brother. Yes, that's all. Or perhaps it's because you want to return there and ride that attractive blonde as if you were the one who stole him. The unwelcome opinion of inner Sakura arrived, and the pinkette's eyes widened in surprise, her cheeks flushed brightly as she thought, Shh. Shut up. That isn't the case. he is nothing more than a close friend. Yes, you tell yourself that all the time, but we both know the truth. You want a man who will treat you like a lady because you're sick of the Uchiha's cold, aloof contempt. Like the sexy blonde mentioned earlier. That's not how Sasuke is, Sakura started to say, he's. But the voice interrupted, saying, I know. Beneath that tough exterior, he is a kind, compassionate person. If it's only an exterior, I'm starting to question whether even Tsunade Sama's strength could penetrate it. Like a battered puppy searching for scraps from the table, you never stop chasing him. A blonde who practically worships you is serving you a 7-course meal in the meantime. And he'll be snatched up by someone else, possibly Hinata, if you're not careful. Well, based on our observations during our visits to the hot springs, Hinata isn't particularly ugly. Even sexy. Sakura started. I bet we could really make her squirm. But the pinkette's eyes widened in horror as she thought, no way, I'm not like that. As she hurried out of Naruto's room, she deliberately disregarded the internal conflict. She nearly ran into someone walking down the hall because she was so absorbed in her own thoughts. Sakura mumbled, excuse me, and a quiet voice said, it's okay, Sakura-san. Sakura asked, Hinata, what are you doing here, as she turned to face the other individual and noticed the midnight-haired Hyuga heiress, who was holding a vase of flowers near her chest. She felt a slight flush adorn her cheeks as her argument with her inner self became the center of her thoughts. She stammered heavily as she addressed the blonde's teammate, I was visiting Kiba.kun, Neji.ni.san, Shikamaru.san, and Choji.san. IW. W. was just coming T.toc na, Naruto.kun. Sakura remarked, oh, he's asleep right now, she added. Sakura saw the vase of flowers in the Hyuga's arms and raised a delicate eyebrow, asking, are those for Naruto? Hinata nodded, her face turning a dark red as she looked down at the tiled floor. That's okay. I wasn't going to be long anyways, Hinata said. The pinkette smiled reassuringly at the midnight-haired girl and said, I'm sure he'll love them. Hinata simply nodded once more and walked down the hall toward Naruto's room. Sakura's green eyes followed the girl's curvaceous backside as she turned to watch her walk down the hallway. Sakura turned quickly as she realized where she was looking, her arms folded across her chest, her face a deep red, her teeth gritted. What in the world was that? In the back of her mind, Sakura heard her inner self smugly say, told ya so, as she shook her head to clear her mind of the image of Hinata's ass. Stop talking, forehead, there you are, I've been looking everywhere for you. Sakura turned and blinked at her friend's distressed expression as the light blonde stopped in front of her. Why have you been looking for me, Ino.pig? She asked, raising her eyebrows. Sakura shook her head when Ino asked, you mean you haven't heard? Grinning, Ino replied, well, my dad came home from a meeting this morning, and he told me the council's made some decisions. Sakura inquired, about Sasuke.kun? Ino nodded and responded, about him and Naruto. The pinkette questioned, Naruto? Why would the council care about him? Ino said, I don't know. But apparently they decided to banish him from Konoha. When Ino said, yeah, Dad won't tell me why, but he was upset about it, Sakura exclaimed, momentarily forgetting Sasuke. What? Sakura whispered, but Tsunade. Sama. And Ino simply shrugged in despair. Sakura turned and ran down the hallway after deciding, I need to go see Tsunade. Sama. Ino sighed and turned to face the ceiling, wondering, what's so important about the Dobi anyway? Quote. Hinata closed the door softly behind her and turned to face the sleeping blonde. She smiled softly, blushing slightly at how bonelessly comfortable he looked while sleeping despite his awkward posture. She sighed as she turned to leave the room and let the blonde sleep after carefully setting the vase of flowers on his bedside table. The Hyuga heiress stopped when the blonde's sleep-aided voice asked, Nada. Chan? Her face darkened as she turned and bowed low, whispering, so. Sorry for wa. Waking y.u, na. Na. Naruto.kun. "S'alright," Naruto said drowsily as he rolled over and sat up, yawning and rubbing an eye like a child. He asked Hinata, blinking his eyes owlishly, "Was Sakura-chan here? I could have sworn I heard her talking to me." Hinata whispered, "She was. But you were sleeping." Naruto nodded and said, "Okay." With a bandaged arm, the blonde gestured toward a chair in the room and said, "Pull up a chair and talk to me for a while, Hinata. I get the chair myself, but, well, Bachan gets mad when I get out of bed." The pale-eyed girl whispered, "N.N.No, it's okay," and grabbed a chair, drawing it closer while the legs scraped the linoleum. She sat down and looked at her hands, where her index fingers pressed together, while Naruto surveyed his room, observing the plain white walls while attempting to block out the antiseptic odor that filled the air. "So, did you bring the flowers?" Naruto inquired, observing the flowers on the bedside table. The blonde smiled and said, "Thanks a lot, Hinata-chan, they're nice. And it gives me something pretty to look at." Hinata answered, "Why? Yes." Hinata managed, not daring to look up at him for fear that he would see her blushing in embarrassment. "Why? Yo. You're welcome." Rather, she examined her index fingers closely as they pressed together. Hinata actually looked up as Naruto asked, "So, wanna get some ramen together later?" She was examining his bandaged body when she said, "But didn't you say Tsunade. Sama wa. Once ya you desanda stay. Alt. Those bandages." Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto replied, "Nah. I was good enough to go home yesterday, but Tsunade Bachan just wanted me to stay overnight for observation. I personally think she finds it funny to force me to lay in this bed, counting the holes in the ceiling. And the bandages are, well, I don't know why I'm still bandaged. Probably just overreaction, since I've never been this wrapped up before." With a faint smile on her face, Hinata muttered, oh, and went on, "Oh, okay." Naruto said, "Okay what?" To which Hinata retorted, Going for ramen later." "Cool." Naruto asked, his eyes gleaming with concern, "So, are the others alright?" As his broad smile gradually faded into a frown. Her response was, yes. Nay. Neji.ni.san and ch. Choji.san we're in bad shape, but tease. Tsunade. Sama-sa. Saved them. Her smile gave him the opportunity to sigh with relief. Naruto confidently said, "Good ol' Bachan, she can do anything." The girl with the pale eyes nodded in agreement and said, Hi. "And I was awesome on the mission. I mean, Choji, Neji, and Shikamaru were good. But I was great," Naruto exclaimed, his chest booming with pride, as he grinned broadly. Hinata found the scene too cute for words and giggled into her hand. "How about I tell you about my awesomeness while we wait for Chan to come release me?" replied Naruto. With her attractive Naruto-kun as the charming hero, the eldest daughter of Hyuga Hiashi, who was still grinning softly, nodded softly, anticipating the story of bravery and selflessness. Quote. Standing in Sasuke's hospital room, Hitaki Kakashi frowned under his mask as he observed the second last Uchiha lying motionless and silent under a forced sleep jutsu, afraid that he would make another escape attempt, or something of the sort. Kakashi gazed at the boy he had grown to love like a son and who he had sacrificed everything for, but who still needed more. For a single, fleeting moment, he questioned whether it was his fault. But he quickly shook his head, clearing those thoughts of betrayal from his mind. He was aware that it was not his fault, nor was it Sasuke's fault. Nin was the only one responsible for his attempt to disappear. The teammate of the Uchiha was Uzumaki Naruto. In their cell, each member of Team 7 played a vital and significant role. The Uchiha was living up to the expectation that Sasuke would be the prodigy, Kakashi's greatest teaching accomplishment. Sakura was going above and beyond to fulfill her role as Sasuke's cheerleader, boosting his morale and showered the Uchiha with praise. Furthermore, Naruto was meant to be Sasuke's rival, without really competing with him. As the Uchiha's own punching bag, he was meant to be weak, never equal, and, heaven forbid, even better than the Sharingan user. However, he overcame those challenges despite his best efforts to weaken the Jinchuriki and undermine his training. He did his best, but he never trained the blonde, making sure he only drank. He managed to place a significant obstacle in front of the blonde even after he somehow passed the Chunin exam preliminary. It was he who had convinced Ebisu, who allegedly detested the blonde, to draw on him. Actually, Ebisu wasn't meant to teach him anything so much as to have him work on chakra training. The blonde, however, somehow ran into Jiraiya and persuaded the Sannin to train him. During the invasion, the blonde outshined Sasuke and even defeated his fellow Jinchuriki Gaara, thanks to the man's training. The blonde was taught the Rasengan, a technique developed by his sensei Minato, by the elderly pervert, as if that weren't enough. Knowing the Rasengan to be equal to his own Chidori, he had been furious upon learning of it, implying that the blonde was on par with Sasuke. Cut the lawn. Now that the blonde had defeated Sasuke, his son had lost to his rival. The idea that he had failed not just Sasuke but also Obito and the memory of his fellow Uchihas made Kakashi's blood boil. Additionally, Sasuke had lost his shinobi rank due to that bitch of a Hokage, leaving his son, the last Uchiha, to live as a civilian. How dare she? He reached out and gave Sasuke a gentle pat on the hair while saying, "Don't worry, Sasuke. The council will fix this, and I'll be training you again soon." Quote. Are you sure this is a good idea, Tsunade? Sama? I mean, won't this enrage the council and village elders? Shizune asked, looking up from the rolled up scroll that contained several official orders from the Godem Hokage. The third woman let out a laugh who was speaking to Sume. Of course it's going to enrage them. That's the entire point. They're trying to push the Hokage around and bring her to heel like she's their show bitch, and using the pup as a show of power. This is merely to show those bastards that Tsunade isn't just Hokage, she's the alpha and they're subordinate to her, not the other way around. You fuck with her, and she'll prove her alpha status. Couldn't have put it better myself, Sume. Tsunade grinned. Sume leaned back in her seat and remarked, I live to serve the alpha of my pack even if no one else will. Hokage. Sama. Shizune sighed and added, I wish I could be so confident, Tsunade. Sama. Tsunade gave the youngest of the three a reassuring pat on the arm and said, Don't worry about it, Shizune. If it gets too bad, you can claim ignorance and following the orders of your leader. People have been forgiven of worse crimes under that excuse. I know. I just wish there was another way. Shizune responded, and Tsunade responded, I do too. But those bastards were smart, believing they've won one over me. They know I care for the blonde, and see banishing Naruto from Konoha as a sign of their power over me. Possibly bringing me to heel as their own figurehead in a puppet government. And it might have worked, too. Except they forgot one thing. Shizune questioned, and what is that? Tsunade's smile widened as she responded, that I'm not afraid to pack up and leave their bullshit politicking in the dust. If they want to play these games, then we'll play their games, but I ain't going to play personally. She gestured with the scroll, saying, I'm bringing in a ringer, a master manipulator. Someone who's spent the better part of a decade doing this stuff on a scale those fools can't comprehend. If he'll do it. Sume replied, and Tsunade agreed. He'll do it. Trust me, that man can be as petty and vindictive as me when angered. And this scroll is going to let him put that twisted mind to good use in repaying 13 years of social isolation and emotional abuse. The intercom crackled to life, and her secretary's voice said, Excuse me, Godem. Sama. But there is a genin by the name of Haruno Sakura here wishing to speak with you, and she seems rather upset. This cut off their conversation. Sume muttered, probably about the traitorous whelp, no doubt. Tsunade responded, we might as well listen to her. Perhaps we can learn something from her. Tsunade responded by pressing the send button, send her in. A few seconds later, the door opened and a ragged, bleary-eyed Sakura stepped inside, apparently oblivious to Shizune and the Inuzuka head as she approached the desk. Her bleary green eyes were filled with fear as she asked, Is it true? Sakura responded, that your banishing Naruto. It's not true, is it? To Tsunade's question, is what true? But unfortunately, the Council of Konoha voted 13-7 for his banishment, a decision being endorsed by the daimyo. Tsunade sighed and said, no, I am not banishing Naruto. Observing the relief in the girl's eyes, she felt like a terrible person. There's nothing I can do about it, my hands are tied. Sakura's legs felt weak after hearing this news, as though a strong sedative had been injected into them. She dropped to her knees on the floor, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as she balled her fists on her knees as her knees trembled and buckled. The blonde Hokage's eyes sent a silent message to Sume, who could almost feel the sadness radiating off her. Don't worry. Tsunade. Sama isn't just going to throw the pup out into the world. She's planning how best to aid him, okay? Sume asked the pinkette, who smiled reassuringly as she received a nod from their leader. Tears filled her green eyes as she looked at the Hokage, and Sakura wiped her face with her hands before grinning pitifully and saying, Thank you, Hokage. Sama. Tsunade grinned back, examining the girl kneeling in front of her with a peak of curiosity. The curvaceous blonde raised a delicate eyebrow and inquired, what exactly is your relationship with Genin Uzumaki Naruto? Sakura blushed and said, Naruto? The girl nodded, looked at the floor, and said softly, I don't know. He can be a real baka sometimes, he's still a close friend, but lately I have been getting this feeling in my stomach. It's kind of what I feel for Sasuke-kun, and yet different. I can't really describe it, but it feels weird. And nice. Warm. The smile vanished as Tsunade said, I see. Her chocolate-colored eyes were fixed on the pink-haired Genin, and she said, Genin Haruno Sakura. The blonde Hokage asked, would you be willing to aid me in concern to Uzumaki Naruto? Doing so would leave you within my debt, and I would be willing to make you my apprentice should you accept. Sakura said, yes Hokage. Sama? As his head snapped up, green eyes meeting brown. Green eyes were filled with a range of emotions, the most common being confusion, elation, and a hint of worry. Following a moment's silence, the Hokage said, don't answer me now. You may go home and think it over, just return here early tomorrow with your answer. But I want you to know that what I'm going to ask of you is difficult, so don't make this decision lightly. Good girl. Also, do you know anyone else willing to aid Naruto? Tsunade replied with a smile after she nodded silently. Sakura responded without hesitation, Hyuga Hinata. Shizune questioned, the Hyuga heiress. Sume smiled and added, Kiba's commented on her constantly sniffing around the blonde pup. Unfortunately she's too shy to tell him her feelings, and he's too dense to notice her affections. Sume received a nod from the pinkette. As the girl got up to leave, Shizune said, before you go Sakura, may I ask how you found out about his banishment? Tsunade had said, thank you Sakura-san. The pinkette sighed in response, saying, I had to find out for sure, Ino told me. She said she'd heard it from her father, and he was angry about it. Tsunade said, very well. Dismissed. The girl left the room with a slight nod, appearing emotionally spent from the events that transpired in this office. After the genin left, Tsunade turned to Shizune and said, please bring Hyuga Hinata here as soon as possible. It seems we've got some untapped resources in Konoha waiting to be used. Then Sasuke, overtaken by that curse seal he was given by Habi Teme, leapt at me with his Chidori, so I engaged him, countering with my Rasengan. The attacks were evenly matched, and were struggling for dominance between us. Naruto said, clasping his hands in front of him, and Hinata chuckled softly at the blonde's intensely focused expression, which suggested that he was completely focused on not only telling the story to his lone audience member but also accurately pantomiming it to keep her from getting bored. Naruto imitated wrapping his arms around the base of the hand, like wings, and pulling them back forcefully. It looked bad for me, but the Teme didn't notice the clone I'd created earlier suddenly leap at him from behind, and take hold of his monster wings and pull them back. This, of course, had the effect of distracting him, if only a bit, and since he needed his full concentration to battle my Rasengan, that small break-in it was all I needed. My Rasengan pushed through, breaking the Chidori and striking him in the chest. I pulled back slightly, of course, since I didn't want to kill him, but what I hit him with was enough to send him flying into the valley wall, then hit the ground unconscious. Naruto, mimicking a bit of defense, threw and fell onto his bed. Hinata applauded Naruto's breathtaking smile as he concluded, unfortunately, that battle was tough, so it was all I could do not to pass out until I was safely back on the ground. But I passed out happy, because I was victor. Then I woke up in the hospital with Chan and Shizune. Chan fretting over me. And that is the tale of how I managed to bring back Sasuke. Hinata whispered, That was very exciting, nah. Naruto.kun. The blonde gave a sheepish back rub and added, thanks Hinata. Chan. When the door opened after a knock, Shizune entered and smiled strangely at the blonde, who smiled back, saying, Hey Shizune. Chan. What ya doing here? Hinata asked, Why does H.Hokage.sa? Sama wish T.tos.simi? Shizune smiled and said, I was looking for Hinata because Tsunade. Sama wishes to speak with her, and figured she was visiting you. Shizune teased, You'll just have to go see her and find out yourself. Hinata nodded and turned to face Naruto, saying, Bye na. Naruto.kun. Bye Hinata. Chan. Naruto waved, then turned to Tsunade's apprentice and said, Can I leave now? Nay. Chan. As the Hyuga heiress departed. Shizune watched the blonde whoop with delight at being able to leave the hospital at last, and said, Sure. Just let me give you a final check. Up to make sure you're as well as you appear to be. Shizune ordered, Okay, strip. Her smile widened as she counted down in her head until the Naruto dance of joy abruptly stopped. Eyes wide, jaw hanging. The blonde spun on her with a speed seldom seen outside of those not wearing green spandex. What? This is going to be a complete check. Up Naruto. That means you have to lose all your clothes so I can do it properly, Shizune said, covering her mouth with her hand to conceal her laughter. The blonde backed away, pointing at her and yelling, Arrow.nay. Chan. As his jaw snapped shut and his face turned a redder shade than tomatoes. It was difficult for Shizune to contain her laughter when she said, Well, if you feel that way, I could get Enko to do it. Of course, I need to get you to sign a few forms first. For what? Naruto asked, and Shizune responded, Boring legal stuff mostly. They're only to ensure that I and the hospital are absolved of any legal consequences for what might happen during the medical exam. Naruto asked, Why? What could happen? Shizune answered, When Enko gets those clothes off you, she'll get to see that sexy little body of yours and, more importantly, your third leg, down there. After which I'm afraid she won't be able to control herself and she'll make a man out of you. Naruto's expression of bewilderment was endearing, but the dark-haired woman almost burst out laughing when she saw how he was laughing. The blonde promptly removed his hospital, provided pajamas and stood with only his hands protecting his third leg from view in response to her threat. Take a seat so we can begin, Shizune said, gesturing to the bed. The blonde turned his back on Shizune, determined to keep his front covered. The dark-haired woman responded with a sly smile, That's a cute little butt you've got there Naruto.kun. After Naruto was safely under the bed's nudity, obscuring sheets, Shizune let out a scandalized cry of Arrow. Nay. Chan. As he almost leapt out of his skin with a yelp before vanishing beneath the sheets. Quote. Hinata tapped her fingers together as she stood in front of the Hokage's office door. She couldn't help but wonder as she stood there why the Hokage would ever wish to witness the Hyuga clan's demise. The woman smiled reassuringly at the secretary sitting next to the door and went back to work. The intercom buzzed to life after what seemed like an eternity, and Tsunade could be heard saying, Send her in. With a grateful nod, Hinata approached the door and grasped the handle as the secretary gestured to it. She took a few reassuring breaths, opened the door and stepped inside, where the buxom Hokage and Inuzuka Sume were waiting expectantly. Tsunade gestured to the chair in front of her and said, Take a seat, Hinata. Chan. The young girl cautiously followed her instructions without raising her gaze to the strong Kunoichi. Tsunade said, Hinata. Chan, from what I've heard, you care very deeply for the genin Uzumaki Naruto. Is that correct? The young heiress nodded, gulping, her beseeching gaze shifting to the blonde in front of her. Is something wrong, Hinata? Chan? Tsunade inquired, and Hinata whispered, Please, don't tell my father. He would be very unhappy about this. Sume said, Don't worry, Hinata. What's spoken in this room will never reach the ears of Hiashi, I promise. Hinata turned to face Sume, but her expression was more appropriate for a prisoner of war who had just been informed that he was returning home than for a girl who was ashamed that her father would find out about her crush. Tsunade scowled at the response, but she ignored it because she knew they needed to talk about more pressing issues right now. Tsunade went on, Hinata, I have some news to inform you concerning Naruto. The girl asked in horror, he's not go. Going t.tod.die, is he? Unfortunately, the council has decided in their infinite wisdom decided that he needed to be banished, a sentence backed by the daimyo of Hai no Kuni. Tsunade responded with a smile to the terrified girl, no, he's not going to die, at least not for a very, very long time. However, her smile vanished as she went on, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do. She turned to Tsunade and said, M.myfa, father versus V. Voted F. For his ba.ba. Banishment, as she watched the already pale girl lose what little color her face still had, as if she had been given a death sentence. Tsunade nodded in agreement with a statement of fact that contained no hints of a question. A small grin returned to the Hokage's face as stated, I have a plan to aid Naruto in this criminal abuse of power by the council, and I need your help. Let me warn you, what I'm going to ask of you is difficult, and will require much from you, but I have full faith in your ability to help me. Also know that if you agree to do this for me, I will be in your debt and I would make you my apprentice. After a prolonged period of silence, Hinata turned to face the female Hokage and inquired, what do you need of me? It wasn't a question, but Sume said, this has nothing to do with debt or the apprenticeship, does it? Tsunade said, come back here tomorrow morning to find out about your mission, and Sume grinned when he saw the girl with the midnight hair nod. Tsunade turned to the last person in the room and said, now, I've been curious about this since yesterday, and I must know. Why are you doing this? As she watched the pale-eyed girl go. Doing what? Sume inquired, and Tsunade responded, don't play dumb with me. Why are you doing so much to aid me in concerns to Uzumaki Naruto? I know you said you were fond of him and he makes you laugh, but that doesn't cause someone to do so much for a person. Now spill the truth. I find the elder's actions inexcusable, and I happen to see the boy as one of my own pups, Sume said, gazing into the Hokage's eyes. Tsunade smirked and remarked, you're lying, at least partially. What do you mean? The Inuzuka matriarch tensed. The fact you find the elder's actions inexcusable is true, but you seeing the boy as one of your own children is a lie. Tsunade responded, and Sume inquired, how did you? Tsunade responded, your ability to hide the fact you're lying is incredible, but there were just enough tells for me to see through it. And had I not been a medic nin most of my life, even I might have missed them. Now tell me the truth. Sume silently examined her leader, assessing her. Okay. The honest Takami truth is that, damn it, I have a crush on the blonde pup. She finally sighed and sagged back in her chair. Sume nodded and covered her eyes with the base of her palms when Tsunade asked, you have a crush on Naruto? I know, I'm more than twice the pup's age. I have a son his age for Kami's sake. But ever since the Chunin exam finals, whenever I think about him, Sume said. Sume nodded, at least until realization struck and she turned to the Hokage with a questioning look. You swoon like a silly fangirl, your heart beats like you're in a life or death struggle, and you feel as if everything would be alright if only he could return those feelings. Tsunade explained. Sume questioned, who? Tsunade replied, how'd I know? Well, join the club, sister. I felt the same way about a genin years ago. Sume looked shocked and muttered, Yandaime. Sama. As Tsunade explained, a young genin under the tutelage of my pervert of a friend Jiraiya, and his head currently watches over Konoha from the monument outside. Tsunade remarked, her eyes taking on a distant quality as she considered the blonde young blonde. Yep. But at the time, he was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed brat of a genin named Namikaze Minato, not the most feared shinobi to ever step on a battlefield. Reminds me of Naruto in a lot of ways, actually. Sume questioned, it's sick, isn't it? Tsunade shook her head and replied, not at all. But he's 13. Sume started, and Tsunade responded, and he's a shinobi of Konohagakure. The moment he placed that Hite.8 on his forehead, he became an adult. He has been deemed mature enough to kill for his village, so he's mature enough to smoke, to drink, and to be in a relationship with a man or woman of any age without consequence. Tsunade said, I understand. But if anyone is mature enough to handle a relationship, it's him. Sume muttered, it still feels wrong. Sume blinked and inquired, have you met the pup? Of course. But that is his personality, a result of social isolation and his attempts to receive any attention from people trying to deny his very existence. According to records, he has lived on his own since the age of 6, and to not only survive, but thrive like that requires a level of maturity not seen in many adults. Tsunade went on, and Sume looked at the replied. You sure are striving hard to bring this about, Tsunade. Sama. With a sigh, Tsunade leaned on her desk and said candidly, that blonde brat has undeservedly suffered a lot in his short life. Far too much, in my opinion. After what he's been through, he deserves to be happy, and more importantly, loved. But Hinata. Sume started, but Tsunade interrupted her as I'm not saying he has to love only one person. Far from it, actually. He has shown a surprising amount of compassion for those around him, and if anyone can love more than one woman, it's him. In fact, I'm certain he can. Tsunade said, just don't close off a chance at finding love again so quickly. Please? Sume looked into brown eyes that were full of pain and missed opportunities, and he heard the need to help her avoid the terrible fate of being lonely, bitter, and trying to find solace in vices. A fate the blonde endured for a very long time before Naruto saved her. Her eyes were chocolate, with slitted pupils. Sume nodded and sighed, saying, I won't, Hokage. Sama. Tsunade sat back with a look of relief in her eyes and said, that's all I ask, Sume. Quote. As he completed putting on his sandals, Naruto smirked at the smirking Shizune and muttered, Arrow.ne. Chan. What she had done to him was embarrassing and felt more like something that belonged in Arrow Senen's books than a medical professional, especially his Ne, Chan. Shizune said, okay, Naruto, you're in perfect health. Naruto sneered as he stood there, I could have told you that. Now Naruto.kun, don't be like that. I am Tsunade. Sama just want to make sure you're okay. In spite of how she sometimes acts, Tsunade. Sama worries about you as much as I do. Shizune responded. The blonde's rage subsided upon hearing that, and he muttered, sorry, Ne, Chan. Shizune said, it's okay, Naruto.kun. Now leave, this hospital room is needed for sick and injured people. Naruto smiled at her and then abruptly embraced her tightly. Shizune's cheeks darkened and a smile appeared on her face as she watched the blonde run out of the room. She and Anko had a wager to win. Naruto turned in a small circle, arms outstretched, face up, eyes closed, as he absorbed the sun's reassuring warmth, practically exploding out of the hospital doors and into the bright, sunny day. After the stale sterility of the hospital, the blonde's nose was practically in heaven as the cool breeze filled Konoha with a symphony of distinct scents. Naruto inhaled deeply and sighed happily as he made his way to his home away from home inside Konoha's walls. The modest shrine devoted to the veneration of the greatest food of all, which Kami herself gave as evidence that people were loved. The ramen shop of Ichiraku. When Naruto was finally discharged from the hospital, he was able to eat his favorite ramen without worrying about Tsunade and Shizune suffocating him. However, he discovered that he liked their concern for his safety, even though he would never confess it to them under any circumstances. He pondered what it would be like to have a mother or sister when they were worrying about whether he took his painkillers, whether his blankets were clean, and whether he had consumed the unpleasant hospital food. Tsunade was his mother, Shizune another sister, and Iruka his father, if Sarutobi was one of his grandfathers, Tuchi the other, Ayame his sister, and Sasuke his brother. For a few priceless moments, he was able to avoid the debilitating loneliness that consumes most of his life by allowing himself to think that they were, in fact, his family. Naruto thought of the ramen he was going to eat and shook his head to get rid of such thoughts. In addition to having a story to share with Ichiraku and Ayame, he needed to make up for the priceless ramen meals he had lost. One that is even more thrilling than the mission to Wave by Team 7. He deliberately ignored the hidden glares and disgusted looks from those around him as he walked, instead choosing to smile at them. Naruto. When the blonde halted, she turned to see Ino standing there, closely observing him. Hey Ino. Chan, I was just going to get me some ramen to wash away the nasty taste of hospital food. Want to come with me? Naruto said, beaming at the pale blonde. After standing silent for a few moments, The pale blonde smiled weakly and said, "Sure." As they walked side by side with Naruto, Ino pondered why the blonde was handling his exile so well until it dawned on her. He was unaware. He didn't deserve to be here, blissfully unaware of his fate. Indeed, the majority of shinobi perceived it as the blonde receiving a kick to the jewels and a punch to the stomach as a reward for successfully finishing a mission. With a sigh, Ino realized that she didn't have the heart to emotionally ruin him by telling him, even though she knew someone had to. "Ino-chan?" he asked, "Are you okay? You kind of spaced out there for a moment. Maybe you should go see Tsunade-chan and make sure you're okay." Ino blinked a few times before turning to face him with a worried expression. Ino smiled and waved away his worry, saying, "I'm fine, I was just lost in thought for a moment." "So, how did your mission go?" Naruto responded to her inquiry with one of his dazzling smiles and enthusiastically started telling his story. His enthusiasm was infectious to Ino, who was captivated by the blonde's feelings as he recounted. She scowled at the start of his battle with Sasuke, cheered when he told her about his valiant victory over the curse seal. Infected Sasuke laughed at joyful moments, and gasped when needed. After finishing his story, he discovered that they had been standing outside the ramen stand for a number of minutes, with Naruto telling the story, Ino captivated by it, and neither entering. Naruto grinned, pushed one of the flaps, and uttered the words, "Ladies first." Ino responded with a little laugh, "Flattery will get you everywhere, Naruto." She swayed her hips in a manner typically associated with Sasuke as she passed. She was pleased to observe that, in contrast to Sasuke, Naruto clearly paid attention, his gaze observing her firm, round rear end as she walked. After the blonde caught himself, Naruto closed his eyes and thought, "I am not a pervert." His cheeks flushed deeply. "I'm not a pervert." However, as he was thinking that, pictures of Ino's swaying posterior pushed themselves into his consciousness, followed by pictures of Sakura's and Hinata's equally round posteriors. The blonde was startled out of his reverie by Ino's question, "Naruto, you okay?" He nodded rapidly, blushing with shame as he practically dashed into the stand, praying that his third leg wouldn't draw attention to himself. While Ino ordered vegetable ramen, Naruto, who sat next to the ponytailed blonde, ordered 3 bowls of ramen, pork, beef, and miso. As she watched the shinobi with the bright blonde hair next to her impatiently tap his fingers on the stand's bar while he waited for his ramen, Ino let out a small sigh, realizing that the blonde would be destroyed by his exile. She needed to do something, anything, to lessen the impact, even if it was just a little, and it hit her like a bolt of lightning. She leaned over and put her hand on his cheek on the other side, then abruptly drew him in and kissed him. "Don't forget, Naruto, many people in Konoha care about you," Ino whispered as she saw his face darken significantly. The kiss stunned Naruto, who looked at her and muttered, "Oh, okay. Whatever you say," while nodding foolishly. Uncertain of what had caused it, Naruto numbly followed suit as Ino grinned and said, "Good." She then turned to the ramen that a smirking Ayame had placed in front of her. He had no idea that he would learn too soon, and that by doing so, many people in Konoha, including himself, would have their lives change. Sitting on the park bench, Hinata gazed intently into the teacup that was cooling in her hands. After reporting to the Hokage's office, she was unable to go home, at least not until she was able to organize her feelings and thoughts. This was necessary because her father would question her and make her tell him everything if he had any reason to believe she knew something he didn't. Because she was too weak to resist her father, she would probably be branded with the caged bird seal and, worse, cause problems for Tsunade, Sama and Naruto-kun. She closed her eyes and sighed as she drank the tea, the lukewarm liquid calming her nerves and helping her to control them. She had to do it for Naruto's safety and the Hokage's scheme. "Naruto-kun, why does everyone seem to despise you so much?" As she took another sip of her tea, Hinata pondered. She had spent years observing her beloved blonde from a distance, witnessing the hateful glares people would give him if they paid him any attention at all. Additionally, she was able to listen in on whispered conversations about the blonde, all of which were negative, because she was so unnoticeable that she could blend in with the crowd. The blonde with the whiskers had a lot of questions, but she had always been scared to ask them for fear of punishment, even from the grandfatherly Sarutobi, for doing so. However, she felt free to ask Tsunade now without fear of repercussions. As she took another sip of her tea, she had a new idea that made her smile. In the same way that she had witnessed the hatred of many, she had also observed that not everyone detested her blonde crush. The blonde was popular with Jiraiya, Sama, Tsunade, Sama, Shizune-san, Sume, Sama, Tucci and his daughter Ayame, Iruka, Sensei, and Sakura. Her teammates appeared to feel a sense of camaraderie with him, while Shikamaru and Choji were indifferent to him. Her cheeks flushed as she recalled Kiba's light-hearted taunting of her crush while quietly promoting it, and even Shino-kun occasionally spoke well of him, despite his occasionally strange remarks. Furthermore, she was honestly unable to determine whether he was joking or not. In that regard, she wasn't alone because neither Kiba-kun nor Kurenai-sensei could tell. She drained the lukewarm contents of her cup and gazed at the tea leaves that lay at the bottom. Her father brushed off her mother's belief that tea leaf reading could predict the future as superstitious nonsense. Nevertheless, her mother had started teaching Hinata how to do it. However, her mother could only tell her whether the leaves' omens were good or bad. After a few long moments of staring at them, a tiny smile appeared on her face. Good things were about to happen to her, according to the leaves that were lying at the bottom of her teacup. And ideally, Naruto would associate those positive omens with others. With the cup in hand, she got up from her chair and made her way home, confident that she wouldn't raise any red flags with her family before her encounter with the Hokage the following day. Quote. Ino was looking through a magazine while seated behind the counter of her family's flower shop. However, she wasn't actually reading it because she was still thinking about the exiled blonde. Although she was a mindwalker and a Yamanaka, her mind was deeply grounded in logic and knowledge of the human mind, despite appearances. If there was anything she took seriously in her ninja training, it was her clan's jutsus, which she had to be proficient in if she was to be at all. Furthermore, she didn't think it made any sense for the council to take such an interest in the deceased orphan of her class to the extent of using the daimyo to exile him. Although he was occasionally obnoxious and frequently played harmless practical jokes on the villagers, he had ceased his antics after creating genin, and his obnoxiousness was insufficient justification for going to the lengths they did to exile him. Her father's refusal to explain the council's decision to banish him, just a passing reference to some law, only served to further complicate matters. She was furiously perplexed by all of this since she didn't think the council could rationally despise her fellow blonde enough to be able to exile him. Hinata had observed her father, in particular, to be a very cold and impersonal man with his family, treating everyone else as though they should be hiding under a rock. He was keeping something from her and everyone in her generation and below by showing interest in someone who wasn't from his clan, particularly someone like Naruto. A rather muted, "Ino," was heard after the door's bell rang. Ino was forced to look up at Sakura, her former friend who had become a rival and now a tentative friend. She knew the other was troubled based on the melancholy expression on the normally cheerful Pinkette's face. Ino nearly used her nickname for the other person when she asked, "What's the matter for Sakura?" With a sigh, Sakura approached the counter and perched her head on her forearms, whispering, "I need someone to talk to." With relief and immense gratitude in her friend's green eyes, Ino said, "Well, I have considered me a sympathetic shoulder for your troubles, Sakura." The Pinkette replied, "Thank you." With her chin in her hands and her elbows resting on the counter, Ino questioned, "Now, what's troubling you?" "It's about Naruto. I talked to Tsunade, Sama, and they're really banishing him," Sakura said after giving it some thought. Ino nodded and waited for the girl to continue, realizing that wasn't the only issue she was having. Sakura concluded, "Tsunade Sama is going to help him, and she asked for my help." "What did you say?" Ino asked. "I haven't answered yet, and I have until tomorrow to do so, but I don't know if I can. I mean, to take it will get me a rare chance, and I'll be able to help Naruto. But there's my parents to think of, and Sakura continued and Ino nodded when she asked, "And Sasuke-kun?" "Yeah. I don't know what to think of him anymore. I offered him love, friendship, and everything I could, but he. Sakura responded, and Ino responded, "He balled it up like so much trash and threw it back in your face." The enormity of both acts seemed beyond Sakura's comprehension as she exclaimed, "Not only that, he also tried to betray Konoha to one of our greatest enemies and almost murdered Naruto. His best friend, all because he was trying to keep him from making such a horrible mistake." Ino nodded, understanding that although they were no longer best friends, the idea of one attempting to murder the other still made them shudder. Sakura said, And then there's what Kakashi.sen. Kakashi said. Ino questioned, what happened with him? Observing how Sakura uttered Kakashi's name as though it were some foul poison. Sakura's face flushed with anger as she said, well, I went to speak to him about Naruto and Sasuke, but the bastard didn't even care that Naruto was being banished. In fact, he seemed happy that one of his students was going to be exiled from Konoha, acting as if it were somehow Naruto's fault for Sasuke's actions and punishment. Ino paled at the idea of a sensei behaving in such a manner. Even though Asuma was a lazy, uninspired jerk, he had a special concern for his students, and if something similar happened to one of them, he would bring Kami's wrath down on the heads of the guilty like a cigarette. Smoking, vindictive demon. Sakura nodded as her frown deepened. Then there was the way he spoke of Tsunade. Sama. And worse of all, his tone implied I would blindly agree with him because it involved Sasuke. Like I didn't expect Sasuke-kun to be punished in some way for almost defecting to Orochimaru. How shallow does he think I am? Ino muttered in disbelief, no. Ino emphasized the word once and said, Sakura. You probably were that shallow once. Sakura looked at the pale blonde in shock for a moment before realization dawned on her. Ino nodded once before grinning and responding, but you're not anymore. You've grown and matured a lot during your shinobi career. All of us, even Naruto, have grown and matured. It's just too bad that your sensei has his head shoved too far up his own ass to see that. Sakura mentioned, yeah, I was a shallow bitch, wasn't I? Sakura nodded gratefully and said, thanks. Ino turned to her friend and inquired, what are you gonna do about Tsunade's offer? Sakura looked up at her blonde friend and stared at her for a few seconds before an impulsive thought took over. I don't know. Sakura replied. Well, whatever you decide to do, Sakura, just know that I and the rest of your friends will stand behind you all the way no matter what, same as Naruto. And she did it before she had a chance to think about it. Leaning over the counter, she kissed Ino's lips for a moment. The pinkette's eyes widened in shock, then her friends, breaking away from the blonde. After a few awkward moments of staring at one another, Sakura turned and ran out the door, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Ino raised a hand to her lips as she watched her friend walk out the door, a light pink dusting her own cheeks as she felt her lips, which were still tingling, all new questions racing through her mind. Quote. With a small, courteous nod, Hinata passed the cadet branch guards and entered the Hyuga estates, head lowered and hardly paying attention to anyone else. No one who saw her gave much thought to her posture because it was all too normal for her and they assumed it was a burden from being so weak and a disgrace to the prestigious Hyuga clan. She soon found herself standing in front of her door without giving it much thought because her feet had worn the path well. She stepped into the room and turned on the seals that prevented the Byakugan from spying on her. She paused next to her futon, grateful for the luxury that was only available to the main branch. She inhaled deeply before carefully removing a few floorboards and peering into the hidden compartment. It contained a number of objects, the majority of which were sentimental in nature and therefore had to be kept hidden from her clan, who detested them fiercely, her father more than most. These items included her mother's collection of pressed flowers, a few storybooks she had read as a child, and photographs of her parents in happier times. A wood box containing a variety of sugary treats was also hidden inside the compartment and secretly brought into her room. She mostly saved it for the times when her father was so angry with her as his daughter that he made her go to bed without eating dinner, which was all too common for her. Another all too common occurrence was when she needed a little pick.me up and was feeling particularly depressed. A picture of her Naruto-kun standing in one of the training grounds, grinning broadly and giving the camera a thumbs up, was one of the only items in her hiding place. He was only wearing a black shirt with his jacket off, and a thin layer of sweat covered his body from the clearly intense workout he had just finished. She blushed when she looked at the photo, but it also brought back memories of why she loved the blonde so much. Despite his flaws, he was a hard worker who was gregarious, considerate, and extroverted toward everyone, even those who detested him. She feared that loving him wouldn't be enough to repay him for all the unknowing help he had given her. She realized that he would probably need her assistance now, and as she looked at the photo, her earlier anxieties vanished. He needs her to stand by him and be the support system he has always been for her. She quickly put the picture back in the hole, opened the wood box, and took out a few pieces of candy before covering it with the lid and putting the floorboards back in to conceal it. She opened one and popped it into her mouth, feeling reassured as the sweet, sugary taste hit her tongue. She pocketed the other candy and promptly deactivated the seals that protected her room, relishing the calming effect it had on her. She went to her bookcase, took a book out, and settled into a cozy chair close to it. She settled in and started reading it, attempting to ignore the thoughts of tomorrow. And she really wanted to know how this particular book ended, if anything were to happen. She sincerely hoped the hero would get the love he deserved and save the village. She read in silence for a while before her head jerked up in response to a knock on her door. She closed her book, put it on her lap, and called out, "Company, come in." The door opened to reveal a branded clan member who bowed and said, "Hiashi. Sama wishes to see you in his study immediately." The heiress felt her heart sink, and her eyes glowed with silent horror as the door closed behind the man. Had he discovered it somehow? To what extent was he aware? What was it he suspected? She put her book down and got up from her chair, swallowing her fear. She left her room and, like a condemned prisoner on her way to the executioner, walked down the corridor toward her father's study. Because of her posture and the sense of dread she exuded, the few clan members she passed avoided her, understanding that her father wanted her. With the exception of Hanabi, the majority of them adopted a similar stance when they went to see him because he was upset with the people he called upon. Knowing firsthand that staring only made things worse, most people felt sorry for the child before moving on. A trembling hand stood up and repeatedly knocked on the doorframe before stopping in front of his door. He spoke in a chilly, emotionless voice after a few moments, saying only, "Come in." Hinata opened the door and walked in front of him, kneeling, head down, and avoiding eye contact. No one, except the elders, was permitted to look him in the eyes, not that they desired to, for fear of revealing his disdain for them. Hiashi sat down, carefully examining the young lady in front. "Hinata, I have heard from several sources that you were summoned by the Hokage for a meeting in her office. I must ask myself what exactly she wanted from a failure such as yourself. Has her failures become so unavoidable that even Hokage Sama has taken notice of them?" Hinata carefully answered, "N.No. T.2. Sama. She did so with an efficiency she shouldn't have, concealing the hurt of his words." His daughter said, "Shish. She wished T.To offer me a apprenticeship under H.Her. Hiashi demanded, "So, then please tell me what exactly our esteemed leader wanted from one such as yourself." She wasn't really lying to him, though, as that had been one of the things she had been asked to do. The rest she simply forgot. "I see. What exactly would a woman of her social standing see in someone such as yourself? Your status as heir of the most prestigious clan in Konoha, while holding power in many circles, is not so with that woman. And your constant failures should not merit such training, so I don't understand why she would ask this of you. Perhaps she simply has a soft spot for failures, much like the Sandame. Both have taken an inordinate amount of interest in another failure, that blonde street rat Uzumaki Naruto." Hinata had to bite her tongue to keep from yelling at him after hearing him disparage Naruto. Even though it was expected and acceptable for him to insult her, it was nearly unbearable to hear him talk so negatively about her crush. "Whatever the case, you will simply have to refuse her offer. Failure or not, I refuse to have any member of the Hyuga clan learn under that woman. And if she makes an issue of it, simply inform her that I have significant sway with the council." Hiashi said with a sneer on his face concluded his remarks. Biting back a frown, Hinata replied, "Yes, too. Sama." He asserted that although she was a failure at most things, she was an expert at one. An expertise derived from concealing physical and emotional pain from her father and clan to prevent their already negative perception of her from worsening. She might even be able to trick Konoha's torture and interrogation unit with her level of expertise. She was an excellent liar. Hiashi dismissed her as if she had never been there and went back to his paperwork after saying, "Very well. You are excused." Standing up, she turned and left the study. This dispelled any doubts she may have had about working with Tsunade in the past. Insightful discussion with her father. Quote. Tsunade sighed for what seemed like the 100th time since yesterday's meeting while seated on the couch in Naruto's tiny, messy apartment. The sick feeling that was lingering in the pit of her stomach persisted despite her plans. Even though she was fully aware of the issue, it was still not going away. Actually, it only made matters worse. Shizune was sitting next to her, and Taunton was lying in the dark haired woman's lap, being caressed languidly. Tsunade nearly objected when the dark haired woman asked her master if she wanted to go on this grueling mission with him. But then she understood that the obnoxious young blonde they were caring for would need all the consolation he could get after learning this news. Being exiled was like being put to death to a boy like him. Tsunade responded, "I know that, Shizune. I don't like it any more than you do. But the only way to stop it would be overthrowing the daimyo and taking power, and that'd be impossible even with all of Konoha's forces." Shizune had said, for the 20th time that day, "This is wrong, Tsunade." Shisho. Both had met the samurai, the daimyo's elite troops, at his court. The 12 guardians were only his personal guards, despite their greater notoriety. The samurai, a band of devoted, trained warriors who would sacrifice their lives for their leader, made up his elite army. However, their armor, which was engraved with unique seals that formed a barrier around the wearer and used it to power the barrier, was what really made them dangerous. The armor absorbed chakra from both the wearer and an enemy. They were able to enhance their bodies in a number of ways, though, by employing Butsu Nairiki, an internal method of chakra manipulation. They even possessed a formidable trump card in the form of Hugaku Riki, which greatly enhanced their strength, speed, and agility at the expense of serious bone and muscle damage from extended use. However, they were prepared to endure that suffering and that harm in order to protect the daimyo. Then came his dreaded legion, which had a far greater force but was essentially a group of vicious psychopaths who swarmed their target with superior numbers and an unquenchable desire to murder, rape, and pillage everything in their path. Since they were considered too dangerous to be left free, they were frequently housed in barracks that were more accurately characterized as prison camps, with stone walls rising above Konoha's, steel gates locked from the outside, and walls that were constantly patrolled. They were notoriously cruel, and instructors would occasionally threaten to send pupils to the capital to work as slaves for the Legion if they did not perform well enough. The poor victim would frequently endure beatings, rapes, and worse before being mercifully put to death because this was a death sentence for anyone. Once the students realized that no Hokage or daimyo would ever permit such a thing to occur to anyone under their authority, the threat was rendered ineffective. As the lock jiggled for a few seconds, 2 sets of eyes turned to the door. When it finally swung open, Naruto was standing in the doorway, his blue eyes wide as he saw his Chan and Chan waiting for him on his couch. Tsunade couldn't help but sigh when Naruto asked, "WH. What are you doing here?" She responded, "Come on in, Naruto. We've got something to tell you." With fear in his eyes, the blonde hurried over to them and asked, "What? Is Sasuke Teme okay? Did something happen to Neji? Or Choji? What about Bushi? Brows? Is it Akamaru?" With a gentle shake of her head, his fellow blonde responded, "No Naruto, they're all just fine." Naruto questioned, "Then what is it?" Shizune responded, "Maybe you should sit down first, Naruto-kun." "Why?" Naruto asked with a big smile, but it vanished as soon as he saw the serious expressions on Tsunade's and Shizune's faces. "If my friends are okay, it can't really be that bad, can it?" Even Taunton, who was lying in Shizune's lap with soulful eyes fixed on him, appeared depressed about whatever it was. Contrary to popular belief, Naruto was a very intelligent and perceptive individual. If everyone was upset about it, he soon realized that whatever they were telling him was bad. As soon as he sat down between the two, his mind immediately went into overdrive, considering every issue that might trigger such a response from his family. "Is there something wrong with Ero Sennin?" Naruto asked as he looked to her, and Tsunade answered, "No Naruto." "Is it Iruka Sensei? Is he sick?" "No Naruto, listen. It's you, isn't it Chan? You've got old person cancer or something?" "No, Naruto, just listen for a. It's Tucci. Gigi, he's closing down his store." Naruto. Everyone's attention was drawn to the brunette, including the pig sitting on her lap, as tears started streaming down her cheeks as if she would burst into tears at any moment. This outburst from her normally level-headed, calm assistant even shocked Tsunade. With his gaze fixed on her and fear consuming him, Naruto questioned, Chan? What is it?" wondering what had triggered this response in her. With tears still streaming down her cheeks, Shizune exclaimed, "Yo! You're being banished, that's what." With that, the world came to a halt and became quiet, except for the occasional sniffle from the Shizune, who was crying inaudibly. Tsunade would swear she could hear Naruto's heart breaking because it was so quiet. The usually boisterous, vivacious blonde sat in stunned silence, staring at the dark-haired woman in disbelief for what seemed like hours but was actually only a minute. When reality hit the blonde, Tsunade could feel the sting of pain in her chest as she waited to see how he would react. "You're lying." He spoke softly, almost pleading for what he was saying to be true, rather than loudly. "You're lying. You're mad that I called you Arrow.Ne. Chan in the hospital and now you and Ba Chan are trying to get back at me by lying to me." Shizune started, but the blonde interrupted her by leaping to his feet and turning to face them. His tone became a little louder, and he was crying as he said, "Naruto." Tsunade responded, "Naruto. She's not lying." As the feelings she had been suppressing finally overcame her and tears started to fall down her cheeks, Naruto turned to face her and yelled, "You have to be. I can't be banished. I didn't do anything wrong." Tsunade buried her face in her hands and sobbed, saying, "I know. I know you didn't do anything wrong. I tried to keep it from happening. Oh Kami, how I tried." When Naruto saw his Ba Chan crying, he sniffed and lunged forward, almost tackling the older blonde as he buried his face in her shoulder and put his arms around her neck before bursting into his own tears. Tsunade put her arms around her adopted grandson and sobbed, whispering, "Sorry," between sobs, as she felt the blonde's hands tighten around her and cry into her shoulder. Through her own silent tears, Shizune watched with sadness as she watched her mentor and the boy she had come to see as a brother console each other. After crying for a few minutes, which gradually became silent sobbing, Naruto sniffed and said, What's going to happen to me?" Tsunade responded, caressing his soft golden hair, "Don't worry Naruto-kun, I've been working on a plan to help you since the decision was passed down. I'm making sure that they realize what a mistake they've made, and you won't be alone in this." Naruto sniffed and leaned back to examine her face while dabbing at his tears. Really? He asked. Smiled. Tsunade replied, "Of course. Do you honestly believe that I just sit back and allow them to do this to you? I'm your Ba Chan, after all, and they're not throwing my Gaki out without a fight." The blonde Hokage stared at the unsure blonde as Naruto started, "Thanks." And then, after a few moments of hesitation, added, "Ka-san." She turned to Shizune and saw the bewildered expression on the woman's face as well as the blonde in the orange outfit she was holding. Tsunade asked, "What did you just call me?" And Naruto, uneasy with the glances directed at him, asked, "What?" After Naruto said, Ka-san, Tsunade questioned, "And why did you do that?" "I don't know. I guess it's because why? You've been more like a mother than anyone else, and I've always wanted one." The normally confident blonde said, sighing, as he pointed to an intriguing stain on his couch, "I won't do it again." Tsunade smirked as she looked at the blonde and gave him a light forehead flick, which caused him to squawk indignantly. Chuckling, she replied, "You have no problem calling me Ba Chan, so why would you have the problem with Ka-san?" With a hopeful gleam in his once dejected blue eyes, Naruto turned to her and asked, "So you do? Don't mind?" She kissed him on the forehead and replied, "Of course, Gaki, honestly, I've come to think of you as my son, and I want you to call me Ka-san." She smirked and added, "Besides, it makes me feel a lot younger than Ba Chan any day." Really? Naruto asked, and Tsunade nodded, "Of course Sochi." As he lunged forward and gave her another hug around the neck, more tears streamed down the blonde's beaming face. "I wish I'd been there for you 13 years ago, Naruto," the older blonde sighed as she returned it. "You were entitled to a better life than the one you received. Today, however, that is different." "Hey Naruto, can your Chan get a hug too?" Shizune said, and Naruto jumped onto the dark-haired woman while wriggling out of the Hokage's arms. A squealing tauntaun narrowly avoided being crushed between them as he wrapped his arms around her chest and gave her a firm embrace. Shizune returned it, albeit softer, and the warmth emanating from the blonde dispelled Shizune's earlier worries and anxieties about their plans. "Okay. You two, the love fest can wait till later. Me and Shizune have a lot of work to do for our plan to be successful," Tsunade said with a smile after a few seconds had passed. As she and the blonde parted ways, Shizune let out a dejected cry, and Naruto turned to face Tsunade, saying, "I want to help too." With a deceitful grin on his face, tease, "Of course you can, and I have the perfect part for you, Naruto. But first things first, remember those pranks you used to pull?" As the boy nodded, Tsunade replied, "Well, I want you to start pulling them again." Do as many as you can, as grand as you can, to anyone you want. Except for the Aburame, Akamichi, Yamanaka, Nara, Inazuka, and Gabanata clans, okay? Anyone else is fair game, but no serious injuries or permanent damage to buildings. Will do, Ka-san, Naruto said, getting up to stand at attention and saluting appropriately. As the blonde turned to go, Tsunade gave him a playful butt slap to encourage him to hurry up. I know you will. Now get going. You've got a lot of work to do and not much time to do it in, she said. Before turning to Shizune, who had also straightened her clothes and dusted herself off, Tsunade stood up. Tsunade's smirk turned from cunning to outright malevolent as she said, "Come along, Shizune. Me and you have our own work to do." Shizune followed her sensei, relieved that she wasn't the one it was for, but she couldn't help but shiver at the sight of her smirk. Quote. As Shizune and Tsunade walked the streets, they both trembled with suppressed laughter at how quickly and enthusiastically Naruto had adapted to her orders. Shops were saturated with a rainbow of bright, garish colors, while others sported a symphony of foul smells, and people were either covered in paint, mud, or the third substance was something that neither of them wanted to guess. She could still see a horde of blondes in orange clothing using a gusto that she hoped most shinobi could use. An obese, bald man who appeared to have been attacked by a paint store waddled over to greet the walking Hokage and exclaimed, "Tsunade! Sama! Tsunade! Sama! The brat has gone mad. You need to do something about him. How can you be sure that it is indeed young Uzumaki Naruto that is doing this?" Tsunade inquired, glancing around absently. Tsunade said, "I see. Well then, I shall investigate and see if it is indeed the brat who is doing this, and a proper punishment given." As she started to leave, she failed to notice the portly man's eyes darkening at the kanji adorning her back. "I saw him with my own two eyes. Dressed in that orange abomination, with that damned grin of his," the man replied. But she heard the mumbled, "demon lover," in a voice he thought no one would hear. The man's feet were hanging at least 4 feet off the ground, a perfectly manicured hand was clutching him by the throat, and he was staring down into the Hokage's hard gaze with terrified eyes that looked like a predator examining a fresh kill in the normally warm chocolate orbs. She growled, "What did you say?" He gasped and snarled, clawing futilely at her wrist, "No, nothing." She said icily, "That's what I thought you said. It seems that you are among those who, thanks to Sarutobi Sensei, have forgotten that Konohagakure is a dictatorship, and I am your ruler. Speak to me that way again and you shall face a much harsher punishment." She tossed him aside like a bag of trash and listened as he crashed satisfyingly into his cart. Shizune turned to her teacher and said, "Are you sure that was wise?" as she left the terrified man who was dragging himself from the wreckage of his cart. Looking at the Hokage monument, where her head was already being built, Tsunade casually replied, "Of course not, Shizune." She went on, "I've just been walked on too much since returning, and I refuse to allow people like that believe just because the council has deemed me an old piece of carpet used to clean their shoes on, that everyone can do the same." Tsunade looked into the gloomy eyes of her, "But I do believe that I was correct in stating that Sensei's the main reason for a lot of this. He was old, ready and due for retirement, so when he was forced to retake the hat, he didn't want to improve the village anymore. He merely wanted peaceful seas so the boat wouldn't rock until his next successor was found, allowing parasites like Danzo and the council to dig deeper into the flesh of Konoha, and those small wounds have festered into the open sores there today." Shizune simply looked at the road while silently reflecting on her teacher's words. "Come on, Shizune. We've got more important things to do than gaze at our own navels," Tsunade said, grinning and giving the younger woman a shoulder pat. As she and her teacher rushed to the Hokage Tower to start the next phase of their plan, Shizune nodded and said, "Right, Tsunade. Sama." They went by 2 Anbu standing atop a building as they were walking. One was a purple-haired woman with a traditional ninjutsu strapped to her back, the handle of which rose above her shoulder, and a cat mask. Her partner was a black-haired man with a pair of Chinese hook swords crossed at his lower back in place of a ninjutsu, and he was dressed in what looked like a wolf mask. While Cat watched, Wolf was leaning against a wall, holding his stomach while doubling over with laughter. "Do you think we should stop Uzumaki-kun Shishiguro?" Cat asked, and he shook his head, panting. "No way, you go. Ha. Haven't had this good Allah. Laugh since he became a genin," he said, straightening up and taking a few more deep breaths to gather himself before continuing. "Besides, from what I've heard on the shinobi grapevine, he's been banished from the village. Nothing we can do to as loyal a kid as him can match that." They turned to see Naruto land in front of an unwary villager while sporting a black bandana over his head that covered his eyes, a matching hat, and a cape. He had drawn a paintbrush and, before she could react, had painted a bright orange N on her chest with 3 fast strokes, which could be seen on her red top. He jumped away as she let out a startled cry, appearing quite goofy with his cape flapping behind him and the paintbrush raised like a sword. The dread pirate Naruto strikes again for ramen lovers everywhere. At that cry, Yugo failed to conceal her own laughter, but she was able to maintain greater dignity than her partner, and Shishiguro fell to the rooftop they were standing on, howling with laughter. Quote. 4 orange. Clad figures labored frantically with paintbrushes and spray paint on the Hokage monument, leaving their mark on the faces that watched the village from such a lofty position. He was able to work much more quickly than ever before thanks to the rigging system he had brought from his academy days, which had been improved and refined into a marvel of efficiency and simplicity. Every color, red, orange, blue, green, yellow, and pink, was being used. His masterpiece, and the work he was doing on it were hidden behind a huge henge, but he had more time to work than the haphazard graffiti he'd done as a student. He smiled, hardly able to wait for his masterpiece to be unveiled to an eager audience as he was leaving the village. As he pictured their expressions when it finally happened, he couldn't help but laugh like a child. Quote. Wearing the same hat and cape as the dread pirate Naruto, 310-year-olds charged through the streets with green goggles over their eyes. With a couple of cans of shaving cream, the leader, a yellow-scarfed boy, sprayed the unwary with their contents. Behind him was a girl with orange hair and rosy cheeks. She had a bag of paint-filled balloons on her arm and was throwing them at buildings or at people who didn't get hit by shaving cream. A boy with a snotty nose and specially made goggles lenses was at the back. The toilet paper sack he was carrying was being strung from people, buildings, and trees. With the support of Konohamaru's uncle, Naruto, and even the boy's mentor Ebisu, the 3, referred to as the Konohamaru Corps, had made the decision to accompany their Aniki in his last pranking spree. Of course, if anyone asked, it had nothing to do with the wager he and Iruka made on whether or not his group of honorable students could cause more chaos than the reigning prankster king, Naruto. Not at all. Nothing. Deep in contemplation of the events of the day involving Tsunade, Ino, and Kakashi, Sakura sat on her bed with a teddy bear cradled against her chest. Her room had changed from being the ideal representation of a girl's room to one that belonged to a shinobi. The pink walls had been replaced with shelves filled with books she liked to read, including books on Konoha history, chakra theory, and chakra training. Though none of them were ever used, the walls also featured models of other shinobi weapons, such as a ninjutsu, a staff, and even Zabuza's fabled Kabikari Hucho. She had a picture frame, a lamp, and an alarm clock on her bedside table. However, it contained a picture of Team 7 rather than just Sasuke. Between Sasuke and Naruto, she was grinning while the latter flashed one of his dazzling smiles. Kakashi was standing behind them, proudly placing his hand on Sasuke's head while grinning at the camera in his signature manner. Actually, her teddy bear, Fu-chan, which she had owned for as long as she could remember, was the only item from her old life that was still in the room. The teddy bear was quite old, one button eye was missing, and there were multiple multicolored patches that stood out on her otherwise brown cloth skin. Despite her best efforts to be a shinobi and decorate her room accordingly, the pinkette was unable to get rid of the teddy bear that had listened to her fears, insecurities, hopes, and dreams when no one else would. Sakura asked, turning the bear so that they were facing each other, "Fu-chan, what should I do? I mean, the sensei I thought was so cool turned out to be a complete ass." Sasuke-kun tried to betray everyone who ever cared or supported him for power and even tried to kill his best friend. As for Naruto, he was always so nice to me and I never noticed him, yet he almost got himself killed and willingly gave up his own dreams of romance just to make me happy. Should I take Tsunade Sama's offer? Ino said that she and our friends would be supportive of me either way, but Sasuke-kun, in spite of everything, I still love him. Sakura addressed the bear and inquired, "Do you think this is how Naruto feels when it comes to me? He's tired of being hurt, but he can't stop from loving me. And I've given him more than enough reason to do so, haven't I?" And kissing Ino. What was I thinking? That ponytailed blonde is so hot that you wanted her under you, groaning your name as if you were Kami and she was praying to you. You weren't asked. Well, I assumed answering was free game because you were asking the bear. Yes, I did ask Fu, not inner. Sakura, are you Fu? No, it isn't. You don't need to treat me like such a bitch. All I'm trying to do is assist. Well, what should I do, in your opinion? Do it. Potential threesome. Training under Tsunade, Chunin rank, and earning a lot of onigiri points with our gorgeous blonde with whiskers and his gorgeous lavender. I'd crush. It would be absurd to refuse it. There are so many benefits and so few drawbacks. Sakura turned to her teddy bear and sighed. Well, what do you think, Fu-chan? After a few moments of silent listening, the pinkette nodded and grinned, saying, "You're right, Fu-chan. Thanks for the advice," she said, giving it a tight hug. "You're so helpful, unlike a certain someone else I could mention." Hey. Tsunade gazed contentedly down at the scroll she had been writing on. She could ensure that the village and council knew exactly what it meant to offend a senju, especially her, even though she had no control over Naruto's destiny. She felt proud of her work after reading it again, and she grinned as she considered how many of the old jerks would have strokes as a result. With immediate effect, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby designate Hyuga Hinata as my second apprentice. With immediate effect, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby designate Uzumaki Naruto as Jiraiya of the Sannin's apprentice. Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby gives me possession of the Hokage library's contents, which I may return whenever I see fit. Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby appropriates 8,857,411 ryo from the village's accounts to be paid to Uzumaki Naruto as restitution for the 13 years that the majority of Konoha's citizens and its legal system have subjected him to emotional abuse and criminal negligence. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby direct the Hyuga clan to compensate Hyuga Hinata with 1,346,899 ryo for the years of emotional abuse she endured at the hands of Hyuga members, especially Hiashi. With immediate effect, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby elevate Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Hinata to the rank of Chunin. With effect from the day of his exile, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby annul the Sandame's law pertaining to Chunin Uzumaki Naruto's parentage. With effect from the day of Uzumaki Naruto's exile, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby declare Jiraiya of the Sannin to be Rokudame Hokage. The use of seals or jutsu intended to control or punish people is prohibited from being applied to any willing or unwilling member of this village by me, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage. All of these seals and jutsu need to be registered with the Hokage's office, along with a procedure for taking them off. Regardless of rank, social standing, or position within the village, any person or group found to be using such seals or jutsu, or who has used them in the past without a means of removal, will be publicly executed as a warning to others who may want to use them. If the seal or jutsu cannot be removed, the person who has been subjected to it will be given land and monetary compensation worth 1 million ryo for each year that they have been subjected to it. The money will be deducted from the accused's accounts or lands. The clan head Inuzuka Sume, Jiraiya's apprentice Uzumaki Naruto, my first apprentice Shizune, my second apprentice Hinata, and I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby absolve ourselves of all offenses against Konohagakure no Sato and Hai no Kuni. Additionally, I hereby release them from all past, present and future responsibilities to Konohagakure no Sato, including from the shinobi ranks of Konohagakure no Sato, along with all of their current ranks and titles, allowing them to freely travel throughout Hai no Kuni. On the other hand, they reserve the right to join the Konoha shinobi if they so desire. Awaiting tomorrow's meeting, the vacant spot had been set aside for the potential addition of Haruno Sakura. It would be easy to edit the scroll to eliminate the blank space if she denied. She placed the scroll next to two others and carefully rolled it up. The combined reparations for Naruto and Hinata were in one, along with the money that Shizune had taken out, and the Hokage library, which included the Forbidden Scroll and Sensei's summoning contract, was in the other. The blonde pondered whether or not she would be adding Sakura, her Sochi teammate, to the scroll containing her orders tomorrow morning. She turned to the big window and started laughing when she saw a big ball explode, splattering multicolored paint on a number of buildings and unwary onlookers. As the sun rose in the picture window behind her, Tsunade blinked blearily at her desk, her head drooping closer and closer to it as she cursed herself for meeting Sakura and Hinata so damn early. She knew that a lot of the paperwork was just civilian or shinobi whining about something they should be able to handle on their own, so it would mostly stay on the side of the desk. With a smirk on her face, she realized that the majority of the bitching day was about Naruto's Hands mission, Prankathon, which was transformed into a sort of competition with unexpected assistance from his small fan club, which included Anko, Kiba, Katetsu, and Izumo. At sunset, Naruto emerged victorious, followed by the Konohamaru Corps and Anko in a tie for second place, Kiba in third place, and the Katetsu and Izumo team in last place. She had disciplined the prankers in private to maintain appearances. At the private punishment banquet she forced them to attend at the Hokage mansion. Anko was presumably still complaining that there wasn't enough dango. Ebisu, she had heard, was upset with the honorable grandson and his friends for what they had done yesterday, feeling that they ought to have performed better and won the prank war, not to mention his wager. Naturally, Konohamaru simply claimed that he would defeat the blonde someday and used his defeat as more evidence of the blonde's value as a competitor. Katetsu and Izumo both appeared embarrassed by their actions, while Kiba asserted that he would have won if he hadn't been hurt, at least in public. In private, they were both giggling uncontrollably and were even considering starting another one for fun next month. Regarding Anko, she simply enjoyed the occasion and even had a little fun with the contests. Victor, at the end of their banquet, not caring what anyone thought. The purple-haired Tokubetsu Junin rubbed against his back, pressing her barely concealed chest into his back while she stroked his whisker marks and purred obscene, downright obscene things in his ear, likely leaving the poor blonde still traumatized. On the large gold-painted front plate, Naruto wore a title belt, with the Konoha leaf encircled by the words, Konoha's heavyweight prankster champion. It was assumed that Tenten's father, an ex-ninja who used his ninjutsu skills to quickly and efficiently create weapons, was responsible for the speed and skill with which such a belt was made. The proud blonde was even wearing the belt now, and as he flaunted it to his friends, his smile widened and he added a little light-hearted boasting to the scene. As Tsunade idly picked up some of the paperwork and arranged a makeshift pillow pile to rest her head on, she thought, perhaps I can get a few minutes of sleep before one of them gets here. Hey, all their useless bitching actually has some use after all, she thought, smirking. As soon as her head touched the papers, which crinkled softly beneath her head, she fell asleep. Now that the day of reckoning had arrived, she walked much more slowly and deliberately. She had gone to sleep yesterday feeling confident in her choice and certain that she was making the right choice. But now, with all the uncertainties her decision would bring, she was truly going to confront the cliff and contemplate plunging into the shadowy abyss. She was really, really afraid. She was terrified of what might be waiting for her at the base of that drop. Would it be friendship, acceptance, or even the love for which she had longed? Or would it be the same scornful disregard and rejection that bordered on contempt that she had received so many times before? However, the idea of Naruto's vivid, expressive blue eyes offering anything less than total, unconditional love and friendship seemed incorrect. There would be a glimmer of hope that Naruto and his adversary could coexist more amicably even if they were completely incapable of doing so, save for his most vile adversaries. That was the contradiction of the blonde, a boy who had experienced so much emotional abuse and hatred that it should have been impossible for him to be so gregarious and open with everyone. Nevertheless, he opened his heart to anyone who was prepared to give him a relationship of any kind, even if it was just the same automatic acceptance of his existence that everyone else received. Sakura jogged up to the beige-coated heiress and said, "Hey Hinata, what are you doing out so early?" She fell into step with her as they strolled down the street, complaining about genin teams and workers clearing up the aftermath of yesterday's prank war. When Hinata said, I have a meeting with the Hokage," Sakura blinked a few times before responding, "You have one too?" Sakura remembered the question she had been asked yesterday before leaving the blonde Hokage's office, and her response was Hyuga Hinata. Sakura said, "Oh. About what?" And Hinata said, I don't think I should tell you." After nodding, Sakura asked nonchalantly, "Is it about Naruto and his banishment?" Sakura could tell by Hinata's stunned expression that it was. She was also astonished that the Hokage actually heeded her advice. How do you know?" the pale-eyed girl asked conspiratorially after finally finding her voice. Sakura replied, "Because that's what my meeting is about too." Hinata nodded, grinning subtly that at least one member of the blonde's team was interested in him. Though rational, Ino was also a big gossip, and the story she had been told by the pinkette next to her was rapidly spreading among the shinobi. In general, shinobi were awful at gossip, just like the general public. However, unlike with civilians, shinobi gossip was transmitted with the same level of secrecy as a critical message, and only to people they could trust. And given the blatant hypocrisy he displayed regarding his own often spouted motto, one provided by his sensei, the godlike Minato, shinobi opinion of the renowned Sharingan.I Kakashi was at an all-time low at the time. Moreover, the majority of shinobi, regardless of age, regarded their Junin sensei as a god, a wise and kind person who was supposed to shape their pupils into the shinobi they are today. It was thought to be the height of foolishness for Kakashi to defame such a prestigious position in this way, letting his own prejudice get the better of him and ruining not one but two future Konoha shinobi at such a vulnerable point in their careers. Therefore, Kakashi didn't need to be on missions in the eyes of the majority of shinobi. To keep him from hurting himself or other people with his foolishness, he needed to be placed in a playpen and given a box of crayons and coloring books. Naturally, many people found her to be a reliable source to quell their desire for gossip because she was a quiet, reserved girl. As a result, she was promptly told about Sakura's encounter with Kakashi, but not much more because, despite being a gossip, Ino knew that some details were too private, and embarrassing in her case, to share. Hinata was unsure of Sakura's reaction, but she likely assumed it was as bad as everyone else's because the people who told her didn't say anything bad about the girl. They hurried up to their leader's office door after entering the Hokage's large building in silence. The secretary nodded to them before pressing the call button and saying, "Genins Haruno and Hyuga are here to speak to you, Hokage-sama." The speaker finally woke up after a few long moments with the groggy response, "Send him in." The woman gestured to the wooden door and said, "Please enter." The two girls looked at each other, nodded, and opened the door to their future. And they both almost started laughing. Because Tsunade was sitting behind her desk, looking half asleep, and there were papers in front of her, one of which was stuck to the side of her face. Fighting back her giggles, Sakura managed to say, Hokage-sama, and, in response to the woman's inquisitive stare, gestured to the side of her face to show the paper that was stuck there. The woman reached up and felt the paper adhere to her face, blinking blearily several times. She was quickly awakened by this and took it off before hurriedly sorting her pillow into a pile of papers. "Well, you both know why you're here, correct?" the woman said, coughing into her hand and blushing slightly. "Remember, that this is going to be very difficult for both of you, and no one will fault you should you decide not to. So, are you willing to aid me in helping Naruto?" she asked, nodding in agreement with their nods. In an attempt to loosen her tenuous hold on her reserve, Hinata's past fears flooded her mind. But she was reminded of the person they were expelling when she saw the happy face of her blonde crush in her mind's eye. Even if they would sooner have him dead than do the same for him, the resolute young man would gladly sacrifice his life to defend the village he loved, despite his shortcomings. Hinata frowned as she regained her resolve, nodded, and said, "Yes, Hokage-sama," in a gentle but firm tone. Sakura, who was observing Hinata, turned to their leader and grinned a little as she said, "Of course, Hokage-sama." "Very well, But do not forget this was your decision and you knew the difficulty of it. Now, I want the two of you to pack anything you might find necessary for an extended trip outside the village, Tsunade said, smiling at the two young women in front of her and folding her hands on the desk. Tsunade responded, because you are going to be joining Chunin Uzumaki Naruto during his banishment. Sakura asked, why? And the two of them stared at the brown-eyed woman in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what they had just been told. At last, Hinata's synapses triggered in the proper sequence, enabling a perceptive, what? Response. That is what you have agreed to. To join him during his exile and make sure that he has friends during this, the most difficult time in his life. Like stated, to say this won't be easy is an understatement, so do either of you wish to back out? This will be your last chance, for after you leave this office, you are bound to a mission given by the Hokage. So, do you wish to decline? Tsunade asked, intently examining the two young women introspective stones. Ultimately, they all said, no, thank you both, and congratulations. Tsunade grinned. Pulling a pair of Chunin vests from her desk, Sakura asked, for what? And placed them in front of the two girls, trying not to laugh at their stunned expressions. For your promotions to the rank of Chunin by order of the Hokage. Naruto has been too, and will be given his vest later. As for you two, I suggest you pack them away while still in the village. Seeing you both in those vests would raise suspicions we don't need at this stage in our plans, Sakura responded. Oh. Of course, Hokage. Sama, exclaimed Hinata, taking it and holding it with such care that it would turn to dust if she handled it in any other way. Sakura was still staring at the vest next to her, her fingers lightly stroking the fabric as though she was trying to memorize its texture. With a smile, Tsunade said, hurry along and pack. I made sure he'd be leaving soon, and you don't want him to get a head start on you. They both nodded, wrapped their vests in a scroll, and hurried out of the office without a run. She grabbed the scroll with her official orders and made a few quick edits as she watched them go. The clan head Inuzuka Sume, my first apprentice Shizune, my second apprentice Hinata, Jiraiya's apprentice Uzumaki Naruto, and my third apprentice Haruno Sakura are all pardoned by me, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, for all offenses against Konohagakure no Sato and Hai no Kuni. Additionally, I hereby release them from all past, present, and future responsibilities to Konohagakure no Sato, including from the shinobi ranks of Konohagakure no Sato, along with all of their current ranks and titles, allowing them to freely travel throughout Hai no Kuni. On the other hand, they reserve the right to join the Konoha shinobi if they so desire. With immediate effect, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, hereby appoint Haruno Sakura as my third apprentice and elevator to the rank of Chunin. She carefully sealed it, rolled it back up, and put it aside. She reached into her desk and took out a small dish and a bottle of sake. Pouring herself a cup, she raised it into the air, tipped the ceramic dish back, drained it of its contents, and then poured herself another cup. To the continued fortuitous fruition of my plans, she exclaimed. Her door opened as she finished the second cup, and Sume entered. After glancing at Tsunade's current activities, she smirked and said, you do realize doing that alone makes you an alcoholic, right? Tsunade smirked as she swiftly brought out a second dish, and the Inuzuka matriarch sat in front of her, watching as the slender blonde poured her a cup. Well then, why don't you join me so I'm just a drunk? So, how did it go with your clan? Tsunade inquired, and after consuming her drink, they understand. In fact, most of them want to come with me, feeling that the council's blatant disrespect shows them to be some of the most disloyal mongrels ever seen and unworthy of serving alongside. I convinced them not to do so just yet, but they still aren't happy with the traitorous acts of the council against the village, Alpha. Sume nodded in response to Tsunade's question, and did you tell Hana and Kiba about your more personal reasons? Hana expressed the fact she'd begun sniffing around the blonde, and Kiba, well. Sume responded, he went into convulsions and almost swallowed his own tongue. Tsunade spit her fourth cup of sake into the air as she erupted in laughter. Well what? Tsunade asked. As her covers gathered around her waist and her arms stretched, Ino yawned and sat up in bed, wiping the sleep from her eyes. She pushed the blankets aside and slipped her feet into a pair of fluffy white bunny slippers before hanging them over the edge of her bed. She stood and stretched her limbs, listening to the contented pops of joints after being out of use for so long, while wiggling her toes in them with a slight smile. She left her bedroom, rubbed at an eye, and went downstairs to the living room, where her father was sitting and reading the paper. And Naruto sat on the couch, grinning at her with a somewhat solemn expression. Unbelieving her eyes, Ino said, "Nah, Naruto." The blonde waved back, "Hey Ino. Chan, I like your pajamas." Ino glanced down at her pajamas, which included her bunny slippers, deep purple pajama pants, and a light purple baby tee with a smiling cartoon kitten on the front. She was trendy and sexy when she was out and about, attempting to attract Sasuke's attention with her appearance and developing body, which made most boys turn into puddles of goo. However, comfort was more important than style when it came to bedtime. When she realized that she made even comfortable look incredibly sexy, she crossed her arms over her chest and grinned. As she joined them in the living room, Ino asked, "So, what brings ya to my house so early, Naruto?" The blonde gave a sheepish smile and said, "A favor. A rather personal one." "What kind of favor?" she asked, smiling as she sat down next to the blonde Uzumaki, knowing without even looking that her father was listening. Naruto whispered, "Well, you probably don't know, but I've been. Well, heir." Ino concluded, "You've been banished." Naruto questioned, "Wha? How?" Ino responded, "I'm a shinobi, I have my sources." She clearly relished the stunned expression the blonde with the whisker-cheeked nose was giving her. "I told her." "Daddy," Ino screamed, doing everything in her power to glare holes in the newspaper he was reading, and Naruto was able to conceal his snickering behind his hands while his shoulders trembled just a little. "Anyways." Ino rounded on the blonde and asked, "What is this personal favor you need of me?" with a look that made him stop snickering. Ino raised an eyebrow in response to Naruto's statement, "Well, as you know, I'm being banished, and I need you to look after someone for me." "Who?" "Sakura," Ino thought, and the pale blonde smirked as she added, "Or is it Hinata?" No, Naruto answered, adding, "It's actually a dear old friend of mine. My only friend before Team 7, actually." He took a scroll out of his pocket, which Ino looked at curiously, and dragged it across one of the seals on the scroll with a nip of his thumb. A stuffed orange fox sat on the paper in a puff of smoke. Its orange fur was threadbare in some spots and covered in patches of solid, polka-dotted, or striped color. It lacked a black button. Like a blue bandana with a shabby-looking Hite.8 hung around the fox's neck, completing its appearance. One of its big ears drooped down, and its fuzzy orange tail with a white tip appeared to be brand new, having been replaced. "This is Chu, and I would bring him with me, but he's very loyal and loves Konoha, so he doesn't want to leave. We'll miss each other, but I can't bear to force him to come with me. So I was hoping you could look after him for me while I'm gone," Naruto said, without thinking about it. "Why me? Why not Sakura, Hinata, or anyone else?" Ino inquired, and Naruto cocked his head. "Well, I would, but he doesn't feel safe or comfortable around Hinata-chan's family, and I think Fu would get jealous if Sakura-chan brought Chu home." "You know about Fu?" Ino asked. Naruto nodded as he replied, "Yeah, during the second part of the Chunin exam. She was feeling scared, so I decided that it might help if we talked. During our talk she told me about Fu, but was embarrassed afterwards, so I told her about Chu." "So, will you take care of Chu while I'm away?" Naruto asked, casting a hopeful glance at the Yamanaka heiress. "Of course." Ino nodded and smiled reassuringly at him. "Thanks," Naruto replied with a relieved grin, then added, "If you need to talk or feeling lonely or something, you can speak to Chu. He's a pretty good listener, and he's always willing to lend a comforting back to cry on. Just make sure that he gets ramen at least once a day. He tends to get cranky when he doesn't." Ino remarked, "Well, he sounds like a great friend." Naruto responded, "Yeah, he is." He grabbed the fox plush toy and raised it until they were looking at each other. Naruto listened to something that only he could hear and then glared at the fox, saying, "No, I don't believe that Ino-chan would appreciate your perverted sense of humor very much, so I don't want you to be telling those kinds of jokes around her. Chu, this is it. Might be a while before we see each other again, so I want you to be good for Ino-chan. Yeah, I'm gonna miss you too, Chu. Don't forget about me while I'm away, okay?" The blonde said, his eyes glistening as he listened to nothing. Naruto sat the fox in front of Ino, sniffed, and wiped his eyes on the back of his sleeve. Naruto got up from the couch and said, "Well, I need to be going. Thanks again, Ino." She heard her father turn the paper as she watched the blonde leave the house. He would peek over the newspaper or around it when she wasn't looking, observing her closely as she examined the fox plush. Inoichi returned to his newspaper and actually read it, laughing as he heard his daughter reprimand him. "No, you cannot sleep in my panty drawer, Ero. Kitsune." He had been secretly monitoring his daughter when he saw her pick up the stuffed fox and say, "Well, Chu, I guess I should show you to your new room." Quote. As he approached Konoha's gates for what might be the final time, Naruto let out a sigh. He made sure that his final act as a Konoha shinobi was to go see Ino and ask her to look after Chu. The only thing left to do was to start his unfair exile, and he was aware that many people would be thrilled about this. However, a tiny smile appeared on his face since he would be able to show off his masterpiece. He halted as he approached the gate, blinked, and started massaging his eyes. He rubbed his fist firmly into them, blinked, and looked again, expecting to see nothing. Still standing there, however, were Tsunade, Shizune, Taunton, Sakura, Hinata, and Kiba's mother, all of whom were staring expectantly at him. Squeezing his eyes shut, he brought his hands in a seal before him, blinking, and yelled, "Kai!" as his chakra flared. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting the ruthless genjutsu to be gone, and flared his chakra once more. However, the small group was still present and they were all still observing him. "What kind of genjutsu is this?" Naruto asked, scratching his head. Tsunade rolled her eyes and snapped back, "Naruto, trust me, this isn't a genjutsu." The blonde said, "But why are you all here?" Sakura grinned and put an arm around her teammate's neck, adding, "Because we're going to be joining you, you big goof." After crying, Naruto turned to face Tsunade and said, "What, but Sakura? Chan, Hinata. Chan. You can't just pack up and leave for me." He then turned to face Sume and said, "And what about Kiba? How can you just leave your son for a stranger? And what about your position as Hokage? I didn't damn near kill myself to get you to accept just for you to blow it off." When the younger blonde nodded, Tsunade smiled and said, "Well, what kind of mother would I be if I let them abuse their authority by unjustly banishing my son and not following him?" Tsunade sighed as she said, "Naruto, I refuse to simply sit by while those bastards on the council walk all over me and toss you out like trash. And didn't you say you thought of me as a mother?" When Naruto looked at Sakura, she playfully stuck her tongue out at him. "As for me and Hinata, we both care about you, Naruto. We were offered the chance to join you by Tsunade Sama, and we willingly chose to join you. You're one of my closest friends, and I simply refuse to let you go out in the world all alone. You wouldn't last 3 days without me, you baka." When Naruto said, "But what about Sasuke?" The pinkette's smile vanished for a few seconds as she remembered the final Uchiha. With a final smile, she said, "He's home, you succeeded. And besides, I think Sasuke would want me to follow you." At Naruto's perplexed expression, Sakura responded, "But whenever I started being a pill, Sasuke would always defend you." Well, after you went after him, I was forced to do some serious soul searching, and came to a realization." Really? Why?" Naruto asked, and her smile returned as she said, "I was a real bitch to you, Naruto, trying to get in good with Sasuke." She said, "What?" with Naruto's large blue eyes looking at her with hope. "You didn't deserve the way I treated you, Naruto. You were always nice to me, no matter how awful I was to you. And I finally realized that. But when you and Sasuke were brought back, I was." Green eyes welled up with tears, and she swallowed the lump as she said, "I was so scared that you were going to die, just to make me happy. And I would never get to apologize to you." Her collar was quickly wet with tears as Naruto put his arms around her middle and buried his nose in her neck before she could cry. Astonished by the response, Sakura stood and gave him a clumsy back pat. At last, Naruto separated from her and grinned as he said, "You don't have to apologize, Sakura. But thank you anyways." Sakura said, her own tears streaming down her cheeks, "You're welcome." Clapping, Tsunade responded, "Alright you two, I hate to break up this touching scene, but we really do need to get going before people start waking up and suspicion is aroused. We'll talk more later." Everyone gave a nod, and two Team 7 members hastily wiped their eyes before leaving through Konoha's massive gates. Both Izumo and Katetsu denied ever seeing anything when questioned hours later by a number of irate individuals. This was accurate because of the incredibly fascinating line of ants that just so happened to be crossing the street with food on their way home. Many Naruto clones grinned broadly as they nodded to each other from their perch atop the Hokage monument. When the monument was renovated, they collectively dropped the enormous specialized henge that had been covering it, letting the village know what had transpired. And many people were pointing at the upgraded monument when they saw it, either to let out a horrified cry or to demonstrate to others what had made them laugh so hard. Two Anbu were unable to stand due to a fit of raucous laughter while standing atop a building that had a prime view of the monument. Unfortunately, despite years of being taught the shinobi laws of conduct, they both consistently failed that particular test. Shishiguro gasped, "To.to. Told ya it was worth it," and turned to face his partner while lifting his mask to wipe his eyes. Yugo, panting, answered, "When yo. You're right, yo. You're right." Both of them exchanged glances before they burst out laughing again. Because the monument, which originally featured 4 faces proudly gazing over the village of Konoha with a 5th in the works, now features 4 faces clearly amused as they all smiled down at the village. Each of the 4 expertly painted faces featured a variety of kabuki style face paint, and 3 of them were of the recently exiled Uzumaki Naruto rather than a former Hokage. The first showed a smiling Naruto with his hands over his eyes, the second showed another Naruto with his fingers in his ears, and the third showed Naruto again, but with his hands over his mouth. The fourth still featured Namikaze Minato, but he was now giving the village a 1-fingered salute, while grinning his widest. Flashback without jutsu with patches of paint adorning his face and clothing, Naruto used the back of his sleeve to wipe the perspiration from his forehead. He was accompanied by a number of other Narutos, each of whom was sweating and covered in paint. "Hey brat, what are you doing?" Every Naruto turned to face the voice's owner, a purple-haired Anbu in a cat mask, with her wolf-masked companion at her side. With their arms folded across their chests, they resembled an irate parent, their faces concealed behind their neutral masks. Just fixing up the monument as a gift to the village. Yeah. That's it," Naruto said, scratching the back of his head and grinning apprehensively. After a brief exchange of glances, the two Anbu nodded and went back to observing the captured blonde. Wolf said, "Well then, how about we give you some help?" Naruto asked, What did you say?" with a fish-like gape. "I said that if you're going to do such an enormous favor for the village, it would be rude of us to not offer you assistance. In fact, we know some Doten Jutsu that would be perfect in your public service project, here." Cat responded, and the skeptic blonde asked, Really? Wolf said, "Of course, Naruto-san." As the two began working outside, Cat turned around and remarked, "Just so you know, many ninja and most of Anbu disagree with what's happening to you." She then followed Wolf. With tears in his eyes, Naruto grinned and blinked multiple times. Naruto shouted to his clones, "All right men. We've got a lot to do and not much time to do it, so I want all of you to be working double time. Understand?" And they all saluted together before returning to their jobs with newfound energy. Jutsu no flashback. Kai. The majority of those laughing were shinobi, who had to acknowledge that it was the blonde prankster's best prank and respect Naruto's level of skill for completing such a project not only swiftly but expertly. More than the change made to the monument, however, what made the majority of people laugh was what had been done to the forts. Before the henge was raised, Naruto was unaware of this change. With 3 likenesses of Naruto sitting directly next to him, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Hokage's uncanny resemblance to the recently exiled Uzumaki Naruto was further highlighted by the 3 thin, whisker-like lines that rested on each cheek. It was so similar that many council members wanted to have the blonde put to death and then repair the damage before too many people started talking. Jiraiya smiled broadly as he folded up his spyglass from his perch atop the Hokage tower. He had finished the first part of his plan. Part 2 and several other side projects were now due. Dot 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 quote. The women in the small group were staring back at Naruto as he sat there. The small group of women across from him mirrored the forgotten plate of food that sat next to him. "Sue, why is Kiba's mom here?" Naruto inquired, and Sume responded, "My name's Sume, Daki. And I'm here as a form of protest against the borderline traitorous actions of the council in regards to your banishment. As for leaving Kiba and Hana, I talked to both of them, and we finally decided that this was the best option." "Were there other options?" Naruto asked, and the woman nodded as she replied, "Yeah, but most of them would result in a roaring rampage of bloodshed and carnage, eventually leading to a bloody civil war between those loyal to the Hokage and those loyal to the council." Naruto nodded and said, "Well, I guess this was the best option." Tsunade shot Sume a glance that caused the blonde Hokage to frown and blush slightly. With his arms folded across his chest and his face twisted into a thinking look, Naruto leaned back against the tree behind him, oblivious to the conversation. He cracked his eyes to glare at them, then went back to thinking, and they laughed at how cute his thinking look was. Unfortunately, this made them laugh even harder. "But why would you care about me being banished? I thought most of the people on the council hated me because of..." Naruto asked, looking at Sume and then to Hinata and Sakura, tilting his head like a bewildered fox. "You know?" Sakura questioned. "No. No what?" Tsunade sighed and said, "Well, you too. It seems that Naruto is going to force me to divulge some private information about Naruto much sooner than I had intended to." Sakura asked, "What about him?" Tsunade replied, "Now, you both are aware of what October 10th is, right? Hi. It's the day that the Yondaime Hokage defeated the Kyuubi." Hinata responded, and Tsunade nodded as it is also the day Naruto was born. "Now, what both of you need to understand is that a demon such as Kyuubi cannot be defeated by any mortal, nor can it be controlled. Well, except for those who had great uncle Hoshirama's DNA, or the darkest, most twisted of Uchiha. But since the Yondaime was neither Hoshirama nor an extraordinarily evil Uchiha, he had but one choice, to seal the monster away. And you can only seal demons such as the Gobi or stronger into a human, or more specifically, a human baby. They're the only ones with chakra coils undeveloped enough to be able to handle the Biju's chakra being added to their own. Now, consider the facts and you'll have your answer. But I want you to remember that, much like a kunai sealed within a scroll, the scroll does not become a kunai. It is merely a scroll with a kunai sealed in it." With bated anticipation, Naruto observed their reactions, observing a wide range of emotions play out on their faces as the two bright girls realized what had been revealed. He grimaced as he awaited the rage, the hatred, and eventually the desertion. But what he didn't anticipate was being tackled by two blurs in the middle, which knocked him onto his back while two pairs of slender arms attempted to crush him with unexpected strength. Two different voices babbled incoherently between sobs as he struggled to catch his breath after being tackled and squeezed. When he managed to glance down, he noticed Hinata's own midnight mane and Sakura's signature bubblegum pink. What? Naruto gasped, but everything that happened was that the pressure on his poor body and the sobbing babbling got stronger. Naruto felt himself starting to faint as he slowly turned a very intriguing shade of blue. Tsunade said, "All right ladies, let the brat go before you accidentally kill him with kindness." The two girls sat on their heels and promptly let him go, allowing him to gasp for air and his face to return to its normal color. Sakura wiped her eyes on the back of her arm and said, "So, sorry Naruto." Hinata nodded as she followed suit. Naruto nodded and waved it off with a smile, using one hand to push himself up off the ground and into a seated position while the other held his chest. "So you don't think I'm the Kyuubi?" Naruto sighed, turning to his friends as Hinata gently added, "We just didn't know that you were Sue, suffering under Sue. Such a burden." Sakura smiled and stuck her tongue out at her friend, saying, "Please, Naruto. If you were the Kyuubi, you wouldn't be such a scrawny goofball baka, now would you?" Naruto tapped his chin thoughtfully, then smiled and nodded in agreement. As Naruto flexed and assumed very guy-like poses, his companions grinned and rolled their eyes. Yeah. Because if I were the Kyuubi, I would be 10 feet tall with a body chiseled out of granite, able to defeat Kakashi, Sensei or even Hubby Teme with an offhand flick of my wrist. As Naruto turned and leaned forward to expose his posterior, he smacked it. And I'd probably be able to shoot lightning bolts from my eyes and fireballs from my butt. And I've never shot so much as smoke from it, he wrote. Shizune sighed resignedly, Tsunade laughed, and the other three women all flushed as they examined the offered posterior. Despite the blonde's scowl and pout, Tsunade said, "Alright brat. Now that we've all seen that flat ass of yours, we can get to work." The blonde harumphed, sat down, and folded his arms across his chest. However, rather than expressing his ire at the comment, the three women simply commented on how cute he looked as he made it. "Now, first thing we need to do is to pool together our resources and see what we've got to work with. Unseal everything you're carrying and group it in piles before you so we know a basic idea of what we have." Tsunade continued. With a nod, the others started to empty their weapon pouches in front of them in little stacks. Then, among other things, they started to unseal weapons and open scrolls. The others soon realized that the blonde's numerous piles were getting bigger than their own. "Naruto, where'd you get all that? Don't tell me you spend most of your money on that stuff." Sakura said, and the blonde just grinned as he replied, "Nah, it's mostly stuff I found lying around, left by careless shinobi. You'd be surprised at what you can find if you just take a few seconds to do a little searching. I mean, I found kunai and shuriken that were practically new just laying around in the throwing range early in the morning, long after the last person went home for the night. And all the wire I found is enough for dozens of large spools." He shook his head and remarked, "I swear, some people can be so wasteful when they've never had to do without. Yeah, but that was a long time ago, after I met Tucci, Gigi and Ayame. Chan. I spent less on food and no longer had to choose between food and rent," Sume said, to which the blonde nodded. Before he could say anything more, Naruto decided to shift the topic by asking, "So Kasen, what are we going to do now?" while resealing a lot of his excess. "Well, there's a town nearby called Otafaku-gai where we can resupply and spend a night or two to properly plan a course of action for our little group. We'll also need to get some new clothes for you, Sakura, and Hinata." Tsunade replied, and the blonde sighed as, "But I like orange." "I never said you can't wear orange, Sochi." Tsunade continued, "You just can't wear that jumpsuit anymore. It's a little too distinctive, and we're going to need to be less distinctive from here on out." Sume grinned and said, "Yeah, and maybe you can do something about those distinctive hot air balloons on your chest, Tsunade." Sama, Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura all snickered, and Shizune gave a slight smirk in response. The only thing Tsunade said was, "You're one to talk, Sume. You'd have to be blind not to recognize the Inuzuka markings on your cheeks." With a sigh, Shizune said, "Please don't kill one another, Tsunade." Saichu, Sume, Sama. Sume returned the scowl. Tsunade grinned and said, "Oh, don't worry Shizune, I won't kill Sume. I have more creative ways to repay our dear Inuzuka than childish insults or murder." Other women gaped in horror at the idea of Tsunade disclosing her greatest secret to the blonde boy. Sakura and Hinata both shrugged when Naruto asked, "Do you know what's going on?" Shizune simply sighed and replied, "Unfortunately I don't, Naruto-kun. And that's what's scaring me most at the moment." Naruto turned to Shizune and asked, "How about you, Chan? Do you know what's going on?" Tsunade grinned and said, "Okay ladies and gentlemen, let's head to Otafaku-gai before nightfall." The group hastily packed up and departed, leaving no evidence that they had ever been there. Quote. As he took the orange-covered book out of the pouch of his weapon and made his way to the hospital to tend to his son, Hitaki Kakashi grinned at the midday sun. The Hokage monument was being restored following Naruto's last stunt, which even the masked Cyclops found amusing. However, Kakashi deliberately disregarded the resemblances between his late sensei and his former pupil, even though they were on exhibit as enormous stone faces, as he took pleasure in the remodeling. Naturally, as the commotion subsided, People began to wonder how he had accomplished such significant changes in such a short period of time. A variety of strong Doden jutsu would be needed to accomplish this, so Kakashi made sure he was familiar with all of the blonde's jutsu. The blonde's arsenal was severely limited, consisting of only 3 combat useful jutsus, as he desired. Furthermore, none of them possessed the elemental jutsu power necessary to accomplish that. Kakashi knew the blonde had assistants, but he was unsure of who it was. Given how unpopular the decision to banish the boy had been among the shinobi, he currently has a fairly long list of suspects. Many of them might find the opportunity to participate in the prank and, in a sense, stick it to the council too good to refuse. Ignoring the muttering and glares from numerous shinobi, he walked and thought that this must be what Naruto had to deal with on a daily basis. Since Sasuke's success as a shinobi was all that mattered, he naturally didn't care much about what his fellow shinobi thought. When he told Team 7 that ninja who don't care about their teammates are less than trash, he meant that Sakura and Naruto were less than trash if they didn't care about Sasuke. To make Obito and the Uchiha proud, Sasuke needed to rise to the greatness he deserved, and the blonde and pinkhead were merely stepping stones in that direction. Naturally, he never imagined that Obito wouldn't be proud if he showed up and found out about Kakashi's deeds. The Uchiha would probably tear out Kakashi's implanted Sharingan eye with his bare hand because he would be so disgusted. However, that didn't fit Kakashi's worldview, so it was dropped in favor of Obito's pride in his best friend and his expectation that the second-to last Uchiha would be no less. Additionally, he would be appalled by the council's choices about Sasuke and work to ensure that Naruto remained in his proper role as Sasuke's footstool. Under his mask, Kakashi grinned as he turned a page in his copy of Icha Icha Paradise. He was so proud of the irrational fantasy he had spent so much time creating that he was likely to lose it if someone ever tried to unravel it. As he entered the hospital, his feet led him instinctively to Sasuke's room, where he anticipated the child would still be sucked into a deep sleep. However, his eye widened as he walked into the room and heard a scoff that was too familiar to be someone else's. His black eyes were fixed on the silver-haired Junin as he lowered his book and glanced at the bed where Sasuke sat. As the boy asked, "Why am I still here?" Kakashi closed his book and put it back in his weapons pouch, saying, "Sasuke, glad to see you're awake." When Kakashi inquired, "In the hospital?" his pupil retorted, "No, why am I still in Konoha? I should be in Otogakure by now." The dark-haired boy said, "No. I remember the seal on my neck hurting, and black marks crossing my skin. But then all I remember is hatred, pain, and red chakra." Kakashi asked, "You don't remember?" "Yeah. Red chakra. It was covering Naruto, but I remember his chakra always being a light blue." Kakashi asked, "Red chakra?" The boy nodded in response. "Is it a Kekai Gekai I never heard of?" he asked, turning to face his sensei. "No, Sasuke. The man said with a sigh, "It's something I can't speak of. But I assure you it's not a Kekai Gekai. You need to speak to the Hokage or Naruto about it." The teenager scowled and uttered, "Where is Naruto? I want to talk to him." Sasuke's eyes slightly widened as he asked, "Why not?" After Kakashi said, "You can't." Sasuke blinked before he sneered and said, "Rescue? You honestly think the Dobi and his team were rescuing me?" Kakashi replied, "Because he's been banished from Konoha due to events surrounding the mission to rescue you." "Yes. There's no way you would willingly betray Konoha. But don't worry, I know Naruto was the reason behind it, and you don't have to worry about him anymore." Kakashi was beaming, and Sasuke was "You honestly believe that I did it because of the Dobi?" Kakashi questioned, "Of course. Why else would you do it?" Sasuke responded with a sneer, "Because of you, Hitaki." With a look of panic in his eyes, Kakashi's smile vanished as he questioned, What? "I said it was because of you. Training under you, I couldn't match Sabaku no Gaara. But Naruto, training under Jiraiya, not only matched Gaara, but defeated him. If the Dobi could get that strong training under a Sannin for a month, then imagine how strong I could get training under a Sannin for a year or 3. Simply put, Hitaki, I realized how useless you were," Sasuke said with a sneer. As the truth of what Sasuke had said crept into his consciousness, Kakashi blinked and slumped. He soon discovered a method to win back his son's favor, but the meticulously crafted fantasy would not be so easily destroyed. Sasuke raised an eyebrow as Kakashi continued, "After you get out of here, I'll begin really training you, and without Naruto to bug me and force me to take my attention off of you, I can really begin training you." Kakashi straightened up and smiled as he said, "You're right, Sasuke. I wasn't training you properly. Kakashi grinned as he added, in fact, I can even teach you the technique used by Naruto. By the time we're through, you'll be the strongest Hokage we've ever had. Sasuke sneered. The man said, okay, I'll continue training under you, and Sasuke nodded while continuing to stare at him. A new voice said, excellent. Both figures turned to face Koharu, who was standing at the door and grinning grandmotherly at the two of them. The old woman said, why, just to tell our young Uchiha that as soon as he's well enough, he can return to training under you. Kakashi-san. Kakashi asked, Koharu. Sama, what brings you here? With a startled expression, Kakashi turned to face the woman, but she simply nodded and replied silently that she would tell him later. He returned the nod, and they both turned to face Sasuke, who was grinning broadly. After turning and limping out the door, Koharu remarked, well, I should let you rest, Sasuke-kun. Kakashi smiled at his pupil and then sat down, Ika open in front of him. She's right, of course. You need to recover so we can get to some real training. With a sigh, Sasuke slipped beneath the covers and closed his eyes, his mind spinning with images of a lifeless Itachi. Koharu sighed and spat on the floor as she left the hospital, as though something nasty had gotten into her mouth. She stopped walking and waited for someone while sitting on a park bench with her cane in front of her. Soon after, Jiraiya's bulky figure joined her, and as he sat down, she struck the ground with her cane, causing a small barrier or genjutsu to rise around them, making the bench seem empty, and their conversation to stop as it reached the edge of the barrier. How did it go? The white-haired sage asked the elderly woman as soon as it was up. Kakashi looked like he was about 5 seconds from wetting himself in joy, and the Uchiha. Well, the Uchiha looked about as smug as ever. Koharu continued. With a sigh, she asked, are we doing the right thing, Jiraiya-chan? While leaning back on the bench. I don't know. We can only do what we can and hope that we don't fuck up too badly. Jiraiya responded, and the elderly lady responded, I just wish that we could do this in a way that didn't make me feel so dirty. I threw up a little in my mouth when I had to side with Danzo during the meeting, especially with Naruto-chan. I know Koharu-sama, but we need him to trust you as much as a man like him is capable of until we can dig that bloated tick of a man out and cure the infection he brought with him. And unfortunately the only way for him to trust you is for you to side with him in matters such as this, so you can get the information needed to finally be rid of him. Jiraiya replied with a nod. She felt sick even though she knew her teammate's student was correct. Sighing, the woman grinned and said, you know, Naruto-chan used to call me, Ba-chan. He was always so cute waddling around Sarutobi's office with the Hokage's hat on his head. She stopped smiling and said, and now I'm an accessory to his banishment, throwing the blonde who used to see me as his granny out of his home. Worse of all, my granddaughter Moegi-chan found out and now hates me for banishing her, Ni-san, from Konoha. She turned to face the big man as he said, I know, Koharu. But I believe that when we can return him home and explain it to him, he and she will both understand and forgive you. She felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes and said, I just hope you're right, and my grandchildren can forgive me for what I've done, and understand it was for the good of Konoha. She smiled wearily and said, thanks, Jiraiya-chan. You were always my favorite of Hiruzen's students. Her face was expressionless as she said, I've always hated those words. For the good of Konoha, has been used to justify some of the worst crimes and greatest tragedies this village has ever seen. Jiraiya frowned as he recalled that exchange with the elderly Hokage. I know. Minato said those very words before he sealed the Kyuubi into Naruto, and Sarutobi used them when he explained why he kept me out of Konoha and Naruto's life for 13 years with lies, deception, and long-term missions in faraway lands. And it proved to be their final exchange, as Jiraiya stormed out of the office after hurling a bile-filled tirade at his sensei, leaving an elderly-looking Sarutobi whirling in his chair. Did you know that was the first time I ever had truly traitorous thoughts concerning Konoha, including killing sensei? Jiraiya asked, and the woman sighed as she I've had that urge a few times myself as I was forced to watch that blonde cherub be all but abused emotionally from afar, unable to help due to both the council and Sarutobi to keep a low profile in concern to the blonde. Can't have influential figures showing too much concern for an orphan, was Sarutobi's excuse. You know what the sick part is? I believe that had I tried to do so, the only thing that would have caused Sensei to stop me is that he wouldn't want me to become a missing nin over it. Jiraiya said, and the woman nodded, and I believe, in a way, that Sarutobi Sensei was looking to die against Orochimaru. He was planning to use the Shikifuin all along, seeking to seal himself and Orochimaru into the Shinigama's belly. He probably felt that if he condemned himself to eternal torment alongside Orochi Teme, he could begin to forgive himself for the mistakes concerning both the snake bastard and Naruto. Kaharu said, I know. Both fell silent, lost in thought. Well, I've got missions to give out, papers to sign, and a Machiavellian plot to set into motion, Jiraiya said, standing up after a few moments. Keep an eye on Danzo, and let me know if that old warhawk lets anything slip. Kaharu groaned and slowly stood up, saying, Alright Jiraiya. Chan. Damn Sarutobi. He never did tell me how he managed to avoid the pains of old age, the cruel old monkey. She waved briefly, dropped the barrier, Genjutsu, and said, Goodbye Jiraiya. Chan. See you later. Jiraiya laughed and said, Bye Kaharu. Sama. After that, the two left in different directions. Welcome to our first stop on this training trip, Tsunade said, smiling, as she stood outside Otafaku-gai. Now, we need to decide who goes to get new clothes and who gets the hotel rooms for the night. After giving it some thought, Shizune smiled and said, Well, I think me and you should go get the hotel room, Tsunade. Shisho. We can let Sume take our students to get their new clothes. Tsunade, who was looking at her oldest apprentice, saw the expression in the girl's eyes and couldn't help but smile as she soon realized what was happening. The blonde-haired Sannin didn't give her a chance to react before turning to Naruto and saying, And you, Naruto, can get orange, but you'll have to make sure it goes with your new accessory. Tsunade turned to the dark-haired woman and shoved a wad of Ryo into her hand as she said, Here you go Sume. You take this money and get the broths some clothes. She smiled at Sume's shocked expression. Naruto questioned, What accessory? Hinata and Sakura suppressed their laughter as Tsunade produced a sealing scroll and opened a green Chunin vest, which she extended to him. Tsunade said, Uzumaki Naruto, for performing above and beyond the call of duty on a mission well above your rank, I officially give you a field promotion to the rank of Chunin. Congratulations, Sochi. The women in attendance watched as Naruto carefully removed the vest from the buxom woman, treating it with the respect typically reserved for a holy artifact. The blonde boy stared in shock, barely hearing the words. He took off his orange jacket, put on the vest carefully, closed it, and looked down at himself as though he didn't believe it. She grinned and put her arms around Tsunade's neck, kissing his forehead and saying, Believe me when I say that you deserve it. She straightened up, grinned, and exclaimed, Now, come along Shizune. We've got hotel rooms to rent. Sume just stood there in awe of the newly minted Chunin in front of her while the two women hurried off. Sakura hurriedly unzipped her own vest and put it on, saying, Congratulations, Naruto. Hinata smiled hopefully at him as she followed suit. As realization dawned on him, he turned to gaze at them, carefully examining their vests. When they nodded, Naruto said, You guys made Chunin too. And grinned broadly, saying, That's great. 3 Chunin out to take the world by storm. Naruto dance of joy in 3, Sakura thought, smiling. 2, 1. And then, without noticing the looks he was getting from those around him, he started to jump around, pump his fist in the air, and shake his butt while he whooped and yelled joyfully. As Hinata decided that today was, in fact, a red-letter day for her, she blushed and smiled softly. Made Chunin, managed to get away from her family, and has had multiple opportunities to gaze at Naruto's butt without fear of detection. Yes, for one Hyuga Hinata, today was undoubtedly a red-letter day. When Sume finally regained consciousness, she glanced from the money to the direction that Tsunade and Shizune had gone, and then back to the money. She stuffed the money into her pocket while frowning and muttering, That sneaky bitch. Sume smiled as he turned to face Naruto, who was still dancing, while Hinata and Sakura watched him. Like Hinata, the blonde was not afraid to shake his ass for fear of being caught. Alright Naruto, while we could enjoy watching you shake that tight little ass of yours all day, unfortunately we have other things to do. Now come on, we've got to get you 3 more Chunin. Appropriate clothes, Sume said, clearing her throat after a few moments of enjoying the show that Naruto was putting on. Are all the women in Konoha perverts, or is it just all those I know? Naruto muttered as the three of them stared at the woman in disbelief. Sakura shot Hinata a glance and could hardly contain her laughter as the former heiress flushed at Naruto's remark. Come on. Are you going to come buy some new clothes, or are you going to stand there staring at my shapely ass all day? Sume said, pausing and turning to face the trio. She laughed as they sputtered and then fell in line behind her, their faces as red as tomatoes. As the four of them walked the streets, Naruto relished the fact that no one was deliberately ignoring him or staring at him. Rather, they were just treating him like any other person. Hinata, on the other hand, was content not to be despised or compared to the other members of her clan, the majority of whom thought she was inferior. Unlike their two companions, Sume and Sakura were just strolling, one absorbed in her own thoughts and the other simply taking in the sights of a different village that wasn't slowly perishing under a tyrant's grip. Does Tsunade have a point when she says that the blonde shouldn't be denied the opportunity to fall in love? After all, since Kuro's death, I haven't enjoyed watching a man shake his ass as much. And if Anko's claims about hearing from Shizune are accurate, as Sume searched for a shinobi clothing store, or at least one that was close, he thought, damn, it's been far too long. When she finally extended her arm, her charges halted and followed her eyes to the store that drew her attention. It was neither big nor small, which suggests it did a respectable amount of business. The Hawk's Nest was the sign that hung above it, and a statue of a messenger hawk watched over the doorway. Sume nodded to her friends before entering the building, followed by Sakura, Naruto, and Hinata. Sume nodded and concluded that this place was good after glancing around at the shelves of sandals, shoes, gloves, racks of clothes, and even blank Hidai.8. Turning to the three Chunin, she said, all right you three, I need you to go pick out some new clothing while I talk to the man at the counter about something for Tsunade. Sama. Now hurry up, and try not to be too loud in color, Naruto. Don't worry Sume. Sama, me and Hinata will ensure Naruto gets more ninja appropriate clothing this time. Right, Hinata? Sakura said, putting an arm around his neck as Naruto frowned but nodded. Hinata blushed from face down and nodded, as if she was so captivated by the sight of her fingers prodding one another that she couldn't risk looking up in case she missed a moment of it. Sume said, good. Sakura nodded and escorted the startled blonde and Hinata away. As she watched the poor boy being pulled into what most men would consider torture, the former matriarch of Inuzuka laughed and felt almost sorry for him, nearly being the crucial term. The woman stood back and laughed as Sakura and, somewhat unexpectedly, Hinata attacked poor Naruto, displaying various shirts, jackets, pants, and other garments in front of him to try them on before going back to the clothes rack for more. Rejected ones were put back on the racks, while accepted ones piled up on a nearby stool. Eventually, after being used as a dress-up dummy for a few minutes, he was pushed into a dressing room with multiple sets of clothes and told to try them on before coming out to model them. Sakura grinned, saying, well, that takes care of him. Now me and you can get properly dressed too, Hinata. Hinata smiled softly and nodded. The two went into the racks more resignedly than when they had been helping Naruto, which caused Sume to shake her head and mutter, girls. Quote. As they strolled through the streets, Tsunade and Shizune searched the buildings around them for a decent hotel, ideally one with an onsen of its own. As they walked, Tsunade rolled her shoulders, took a deep breath, and let it out as a deep sigh. She also stretched her back, pushing her buxom chest out, which caused several men to faint from severe nosebleeds. Let me tell you, Konoha was slowly beginning to suffocate me, Shizune. After so long being free to go as I pleased, having to stay in one place and be respectful and understanding to a group of hypocritical bastards who crow about the will of fire and Konoha's superiority over the other violent, uncivilized villages while being every bit as violent and uncivilized. It was growing a tumor in my stomach, I know it. Tsunade said, pointing to her eldest apprentice. To be honest, I enjoyed knowing where I would sleep each night and not having to worry about being woken at midnight by you, half drunk and breasts hanging free so we could get a head start on the debt collectors. Shizune responded, and Tsunade chuckled. Yeah, that was nice for a while, but it couldn't stop the suffocating feeling I was forced to endure. Not to mention the paperwork and having to deal with the scheming, backstabbing, and double-crossing of the council, in a never-ending battle to get and retain any scrap of influence or power for themselves and their families. Jiraiya always liked that cloak and dagger political shit, not me. Shizune nodded. She had come to despise that too, and the awful funk it always left her mentor and closest mother. Figure in. The buxom woman was taken close by an old lover before she could re-establish the barrier of indifference around herself, and she knew of only 3 people who could pull her out of a depressive spiral. They were Jiraiya, herself, and Uzumaki Naruto, who was the cause of their departure. Tsunade muttered, "Damn, I forgot to put it on earlier." Shizune turned to her sensei inquisitively, trying to figure out what she was talking about. She was aware that the older woman was already wearing underwear and that no bra could ever fit her enormous bosom. It was very easy to see anything else. However, Tsunade had already removed a scroll, opened it, and, with a swift flick of her thumb, pulled a swath of blood across a storage seal before Shizune could inquire. An all-2. Familiar conical hat emerged on top of it in a puff of smoke. Tsunade. Shisho. You didn't? Shizune exclaimed, gazing at the Hokage's hat resting on the scroll in which it had been found. She saw her mentor smile at the dark-haired woman as he casually picked it up and put it on top of her head. Tsunade grinned and said, "The sun was really beginning to bother me, Shizune." However, the woman just mumbled, "Tsunade. Shisho," while staring at the hat on top of her master's head. "You really need to learn to prioritize things better, Shizune." Tsunade said, "What? You didn't care when we cleared out the Hokage's library, took the forbidden scroll, or snatched Sensei's Saru contract. But the fact that I took a silly hat has got you shocked beyond belief." The dark-haired woman blinked a few times before letting out a quiet giggle. Tsunade asked, "And what's so funny?" Shizune fought back her laughter and replied, "It's just that you two told me to prioritize better." Tsunade blinked, then understood what the younger woman was getting at. Shizune was the sensible, rational one on their journey. The person who had to set daily priorities because Tsunade was too sentimental and nonsensical to do it herself. For Tsunade to advise Shizune to set better priorities. People on the street stared at the pigtailed blonde as she joined her student in a good laugh, her shoulders trembling as the hat shielded her head. Undoubtedly, they were curious as to why the Hokage of Konoha had thought them deserving of a visit and were somewhat concerned about the implications for them. Quote. Sume observed Naruto examining his new attire while turning in front of a mirror. He wore a pair of knee-length tiger orange khakis with black stitching on the side pockets and back. He was wearing his vest over a black shirt now, with a short-sleeved orange jacket that was hooded and stopped above the elbows. He wore a pair of fingerless black gloves with metal guards on the backs, black sandals on his feet, and a leather belt with multiple pouches hanging from it, the buckle shaped like a fox's head, to hold up his pants. Taking in the blonde's bare calves and forearms, Sume said, "Nice choice, Naruto." The blonde smiled and added, "Yeah, I like it too." Hinata and Sakura said that it's better than my old jumpsuit, and it isn't as cumbersome either. Whatever that means. Sume asked, "Speaking of which, where are those two?" Naruto pointed to the changing areas and remarked, "They went in there to change together. I don't know why, but apparently they need help doing so." "I meant it when I said I liked them, Naruto. Really accentuates your cute ass," Sume said, nodding. "It does what to my butt?" Naruto inquired, looking at the woman with mortified blue eyes who responded with a grin. "Don't blow a blood vessel, Naruto. All that means is that they show off your butt. And if you want to get you a girlfriend, the first step is to accentuate your positives, like those eyes of yours. Girls go giddy over such expressive and open eyes, makes a guy look deep and empathic, like good boyfriend material." With curiosity, Naruto questioned, "Really?" and went on, "What else will help me get a girlfriend?" She smiled and said, "Take a seat, and I'll see if I can't help you become a real lady killer." Sume then sat down on a bench and patted the area next to her. She sighed and said, "It's a term, Naruto. All it means is that the girls will like you a lot." Naruto said, "But I don't want to kill them. I want to date them, hold their hands, maybe even kiss them." The blonde asked, "So, how do I get a girlfriend?" with a megawatt smile on his face as he sat down in the seat that had been offered. The blonde nodded, giving her more attention than he ever did in class, and Sume put an arm around the boy's neck and said, "All right, my young pupil. Sume's lady killer class is now in session. Listen well, and I promise you will get a girlfriend." Because this information was truly helpful, in contrast to Iruka's lessons about Konoha's history and the earlier Hokages. Quote. Sakura had recognized her error the moment they walked into the dressing room together. She gulped and fought a flush as she kept her back to Hinata, focusing all of her energy on getting dressed while she adamantly affirmed her sexuality to herself and listened to how thin she sounded. The issue was made worse by the obscene, pornographic images that were constantly flooding her thoughts, thanks to inner Sakura, the bane of her existence, who was mimicking Hinata's actions by alternating between sobbing and moaning in her own voice. With Hinata just inches away, the pinkhead considered yelling for inner Sakura to stop talking, but she decided against it. Sakura was getting out of her pants when Hinata softly said, "Sakura-chan, may I ask why you a personal question?" Sakura gritted her teeth as inner Sakura grabbed the opportunity and ran with it, telling a story that was more appropriate for one of Jiraiya's Icha books than the imagination of a teenage kunoichi. Sakura gulped and said, "Of course, Hinata." Hinata asked the pinkhead, "Is something wrong? You seem tense?" as she felt the eyes on her nude back. "No, not at all," Sakura exclaimed, smiling apprehensively despite her gaze fixed on the wall. When Hinata noticed that Sakura appeared almost compulsive about avoiding eye contact with her when she wasn't wearing bulky clothing, she scowled, and her eyes lowered. She should have anticipated that the pinkhead would feel uneasy due to her poor form. For her clan, it had the same effect. Turning away, Hinata muttered, Oh, I understand. I'll just go." "Why?" Sakura asked with a frown. As Sakura realized how the emotionally fragile girl had taken her avoidance to look at her, her eyes widened. Hinata's response was, because I'm obviously making you very uncomfortable." "You aren't making me uncomfortable at all," she exclaimed, spinning with a broad smile as her treacherous eyes began to take in Hinata's smooth, soft body, which was now free of the restriction of her heavy jacket and trousers. The lilac-eyed girl's form was something even women in their 20s would kill for, and she soon found herself caught between sloppily drooling and bitterly jealous. It was more difficult to turn away because the only thing preventing Sakura from appreciating every inch of Hinata's body was an orange bra and pair of panties that matched the color of Naruto's old jumpsuit. Sakura denied that she was uncomfortable, but Hinata still looked at her clothes and tapped her fingers together, as if she wanted to get dressed and run. Sakura gave Hinata a gentle pat on the shoulder and said, "Hinata." Her mouth went dry all of a sudden, and she was afraid to say what she knew had to be said for fear of it happening again. However, she was no longer as confident and self-assured as she had been with Sasuke, and she was starting to wonder why. She swallowed, shook it off, and said, "Hinata, the truth is that I'm confused." Lilac's eyes suddenly shifted to the Haruno team, and she asked, about what?" with a look of bewilderment. Sakura sat and covered her face with her hands while muttering, For years I've had what I thought was love for Sasuke, forsaking everything else for him, including my own feelings at times. But after the incident a few days ago, I was forced to do a lot of soul-searching, and feelings I didn't know were there surfaced." She had pushed aside some of the clothes to make room for a seat on the bench. Hinata sighed as she joined Sakura on the bench, but she first asked, "What kind of feelings?" Sakura said, Well, first there's my blonde baka of a teammate Naruto. I was forced to really look at how I treated him, and how I treated him in return. I realized that while I was a complete pill to him, he has been nothing but kind to me, including being willing to destroy his own happiness for mine. God, I was such a shallow bitch." Hinata scowled at how she treated the nicest guy in Konoha. At least in her opinion. but her disappointment started to fade when she realized Sakura had realized her mistakes. Sakura said, "Then there's why, you." Hinata's eyes widened as she waited for Sakura to continue, anxious about the direction of this. Sakura sighed and embraced herself, saying, I've been having thoughts. Traitorous thoughts about you and me, together. Hinata had to strain to hear the final word. Lilac eyes widened at the sound of those words as she spoke. Really? Hinata said, and Sakura replied, I don't know what to make of them. For so long I've loved Sasuke, that I never thought about actually being gay. I can't be gay, I just know it, but when I think about you or Ino, I get a feeling in my stomach only Sasuke has ever given me. I even kissed Ino, and I actually liked it. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be normal? Sakura whimpered, fighting back a sob. When Hinata realized how much this was hurting her friend, her nurturing, caring side came out and she put her arms around Sakura and held her close. Sakura tensed briefly at being near the Hyuga's almost nude body, but as thin fingers started to caress a head of pink hair, her green eyes welled up with tears. She put her arms around Hinata and pressed her face against the girl's shoulder. Sakura-chan, there's nothing wrong with you. You are normal, I promise, Hinata whispered softly as she shushed her and rocked gently. Sakura exclaimed, "No, I'm no not. I like girls. How is that normal?" Hinata blushed and replied, "Because," before letting it end there out of embarrassment. Because why?" Sakura asked, blinking and sniffling. "It better not be, because I said so," she added, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. "Then why?" Sakura asked after Hinata said, "No." Sighing softly, Hinata replied, Because when I was a little girl, my mom was pregnant with Hanabi, but she was sick. One day she asked me to sit with her on the bed with her. She hugged me close and told me that she loved me, and she had something I am important to tell me. Sitting me in her lap, she gave me a weary smile and said that I shouldn't marry for clan politics, but for love. To not make the same mistake as he her. Hinata went on, she told me that she cared for Sama, but didn't love him. She said that there was another person she loved, but could never be with. Sakura sat in silence, captivated by the story. Sakura asked softly, who? As Hinata's eyes followed the surge of feelings in the lilac-hued depths. Hinata nodded and continued, she said her name was Makoto, Sasuke's mom. She explained how they'd been close as genin, and how they grew to love one another as time passed. But unfortunately, clan politics got in the way, and forced them to be apart, to marry men they didn't love to make the elders happy. I was confused at first, and asked if it was okay for girls to love each other like boys and girls did in my storybooks. Sheila laughed softly and said that of course it was, that there was nothing wrong with boys loving boys or girls loving girls. She then kissed my forehead and told me that no matter what, I should always love who I wanted, and not listen to those farts on the elders company council. I giggled and told her she was silly, and she smiled, tickled me, and said that I was her little ray of sunshine. Gulping, Hinata removed the tears from her cheeks and she died a short time later while giving birth to Hanabi, Makoto. Sama was at the funeral, and she cried like a woman who lost a love and not a father friend cried. I didn't know at the time, but as time went on, I figured it out, and took mom's words to heart. And my mom isn't a liar, she? Hinata asked, looking at Sakura with a sorrowful smile. The two sat in comfortable silence until Sakura said, Thank you, Hinata, for caring, and for telling me that story. Sakura returned the smile and shook her head, saying, "No, I don't think she is." Sakura smiled and said, "We better hurry up and get dressed. Wouldn't want those two perverts on the other side of the door getting any ideas, would we?" Hinata said, "You're welcome." "You know it's true, Hinata," the pinkhead said, simply sticking her tongue out as Hinata gasped in surprise, "Sakura-chan." Hinata whispered, "Street still." As the two started to dress, a heavy burden starting to fall off their shoulders. The two soon discovered that not only were Naruto and Sume staring at them, but also the dark-haired girl seated at the front counter, her red eyes gleaming with interest, as they left the dressing room in their original attire, holding a few sets of clothing they liked. Both girls flushed when Sume said, "Mind telling us just what the hell was going on in there?" Sakura replied, "Just having a hard.to, heart." Sume raised an eyebrow and smirked mischievously as she asked, "Just having a hard.to, heart?" Sakura waved her hands in front of her and responded, "We were not doing that." Naruto grinned confidently and said, "I believe ya. You and Hinata aren't perverts like Arasenin." Hinata smiled subtly, her blush deepening at the compliment. The blonde blushed and said, "I doubt Hinata would want to go out with just me." Sume winked and said, "Well then, why don't you and Hinata go out later, just the two of you?" He then smiled self-deprecatingly and added, "I mean, who would? I'm just the orange-clad knuckle-headed baka, and no one wants that in a boyfriend." Sume and Hinata both thought, "I do," but Hinata said out loud, I would be honored to go out with you." "Really?" Naruto inquired, and when the girl nodded, his sardonic smile turned into a dazzling megawatt smile as he exclaimed, "Okay." As the blushing and smiling blonde girl vanished into the clothes racks, Sume proposed, "Say Hinata, why don't you and Naruto go get some clothes for a nice dinner together?" Sume gestured to the bench and turned back to Sakura, saying, "Now you will sit down and tell me what you and Hinata were talking about." "Do I have to?" Sakura inquired, and Sume responded, "Sakura, I want you to trust me when I say that you can confide in me. No matter what's bothering you, I assure you that you can come to me and I'll do whatever I have in my power to help you." Sakura sighed and nodded before sitting down to explain to the Inuzuka matriarch what she had told Hinata. As Sume observed Hinata and Naruto sitting close by with their store-bought bags, chatting briefly, she let out a sigh. The former heiress was blushing profusely, but she was gradually warming up to the blonde. Although she couldn't help but feel jealous at the sight, it was actually pretty cute. With the knowledge that she had set it up in the first place, the twinge was attacked and fiercely stomped down. She immediately focused on another issue to quell the simmering jealousy. That would be Haruno Sakura and her jumbled and contradictory feelings. Sume was aware that she had promised to support the girl in any way she could, but she was sadly limited to offering consolation and encouragement and crossing her fingers. Additionally, as an Inuzuka, she hated playing such a passive role in any circumstance, particularly when it meant she couldn't help someone she cared about who was in pain. She turned to the pink-haired girl sitting next to her, who was acting unusually reserved at the moment, and rubbed her temples. Naturally, the Inuzuka recognized that the girl was feeling emotionally spent because she had spilled her guts not once, but twice in such a short period of time. Sume sighed once more and gave the girl a shoulder pat, which made the pinkhead turn to face her. Sume smiled reassuringly at the child, doing the only thing she could at the time. Sakura gave it back with a feeble one of her own before turning back to her hands and thinking deeply. Naturally, the woman's thoughts of Sakura prompted her to recall her brief conversation with the store's youthful cashier. Flashback without jutsu. Sume examined the 3 piles of clothing, one for Hinata, one for Sakura, and one for Naruto, that were lying on the counter. The 3 of them stood close together as Naruto chatted joyfully with the young Hyuga, who blushed and smiled quietly. Sakura, meanwhile, simply stood close by, observing the pair with a look of jealousy on her face. The woman with the red eyes smiled and asked, "So, what was with the girls in the dressing room?" Sume frowned and said, "I don't believe that's any of your damn business." The woman grinned broadly and said, "Ah, don't get all mad. I'm just curious, that's all." Sume's frown only grew as she sounded out, "How about you do your job and quit sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" As Sume continued to glare, followed by Naruto and Sakura, the woman muttered, all right, sheesh. No reason to bite my head off. I can't help it if they decided that a dressing room in a store was the best place to start airing dirty laundry." She then started ringing up the various articles of clothing, and Hinata even appeared a little irritated. But when Hinata noticed the woman's eyes, she said, Excuse me." The woman looked up at the Hyuga and said, "Yeah. Oh, so you've heard of my cousin the infamous Junin, huh? Our dads happen to be brothers, though with her busy career as a ninja, we don't see much of each other." "Why? You know her?" Hinata asked. "Are you related to Yuhi Kurenai?" The woman smiled broadly. Hinata replied, "She was my Junin sensei." The woman gazed at her for a few seconds before realizing, "Oh. You must be the shy Hyuga girl Kurenai spoke of in her letters." Her smile widened as she turned to face the blonde in an orange outfit and said, "And that must make you Uzumaki Naruto." "Yep. That's me, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto grinned and nodded. "I'm gonna be the strongest shinobi ever," he said, prodding his chest with his thumb. The cashier laughed as Naruto squawked indignantly and glared at her. "Well, you better work hard. 'Cause I've heard some pretty impressive things about the Yondaime and Sandaime. So if a scrawny runt like you wants to beat them, you're gonna have to make up a lot of ground," she said. Naruto blinked and turned to face Hinata as he asked, "Hinata? My wife?" The woman added, "Also, I'd suggest you not let Hinata go. She's gonna make a man a great wife someday, and if you want to be the best, you gotta have a wife to match." Naruto looked at her, smiling, and said, "Sure, why not?" He was the only one, judging by the three knowing grins, to notice the midnight-haired girl's face darken. Sume looked to the cashier and asked, "How much?" The cashier replied, "It'll come to Jutsu no flashback." "Kai, so, I take it you managed to get the brat out of those neon kill.me. Now, colored clothes?" The four turned to see Taunton curled up in the dark-haired woman's arms as Tsunade and Shizune approached. However, nobody was looking at the cozy pig or the woman who was holding it. They were on top of her master's head, on the hat. Sakura's green eyes widened as she exclaimed, "Tsunade! Sama!" The blonde questioned, "What? You stole the Hokage's hat?" Sume asked, and when the blonde nodded, she started laughing uncontrollably, and Naruto joined in. "Why?" Hinata asked as the two barely stayed seated. Hinata blinked, not believing the woman but not wanting to dispute her. Tsunade responded, "Because I like it, and it does a good job of keeping the sun off of me. Besides, if I hadn't, the brat would never have stopped bitching about how hard he worked to get me to put it on." Tsunade wiped away her tears and said, "Now come along you four, I'll show you to the hotel." Sume then added, "Why? While we're doing so, we can look for a nice restaurant." Sakura smiled, some of her emotional exhaustion gone, and said, "Hinata and Naruto have got a date tonight." Tsunade asked, "What for?" "Really?" Shizune asked, turning to face the two, who both nodded. Hinata flushed, and Naruto grinned. "That's great," said Shizune with a smile. Naruto scratched the back of his head and remarked, "Well, you need to thank Sume-chan then. She's the one who suggested we do it. I still don't understand why a girl as nice as Hinata would want to go on a date with me." "She did she?" Tsunade asked, raising her eyebrows and turning to face Sume with bewildered eyes. Sume grinned and said, "What? If I waited for those two to do it, then we'd never get anywhere." However, Tsunade scowled when she noticed that the smile was forced. Shizune grinned and said, "So that means we need to hurry so these two can get ready," before guiding them to the hotel. She was unaware of the silent "We're talking later" expression Sume was receiving from her master as the group followed. As the sun slowly rose through the window behind him, Danzo sat at his desk and gazed intently at a copy of Tsunade's decrees. Before Jiraiya could be found and become Hokage, the council had used it to keep the final Uchiha in the shinobi forces. Sume's self-imposed exile was considered irrelevant, as was the fact that both the worthless civilian girl and the weakling Hyuga accompanied him in exile. That simply meant they had to deal with the young daughter of the feral woman, who was reportedly being advised by the former clan head's familiar, Kuromaru, a talking dog with an eye patch. More concerning, though, was the fact that she stole the Hokage's library, which included the Forbidden Scroll, and made public facts that many council members wanted to keep secret. 6 people now hold so much power and knowledge that was once in the village. People who might be able to share that information with another village if they so choose. Even worse was the fact that Uzumaki Naruto was actually Namikaze Naruto, the sole child of Uzumaki Kushina, the former head of the tiny village of Uzugakure no Sato, and Yandaime Hokage Namikaze Minato. Someone from the council had succeeded in getting the relevant birth certificate and marriage license into the hands of the villagers before it could be stopped. The council had exiled the son of their most adored member, and word was getting out fast. Many of the civilian members were in denial, unwilling to accept that the hated Uzumaki was the only son of the man they considered to be a god. It was unquestionably a genuine political shitstorm. Nonetheless, the shinobi community was in a frenzy, calling for the dismissal of numerous council members. He in particular was taking a great deal of damage, being one of the biggest supporters of the motion, and he already felt his formerly iron grip upon power slipping. He would probably be put to death for his previous deeds if it was lost. His lone eyes shifted from the paperwork to the other person in the room, who sat regal in front of him, staring at the leader of Ni with icy, pale lavender eyes. If Danzo could afford to have friends and confidants, he was positive that one of his best friends would be Hyuga Heishi. However, neither man recognized the necessity of such things, and their relationship was solely commercial. Sighing, Danzo said, "It appears Tsunade has caused us quite a few problems, and all for what should have been a weapon. But that soft-hearted Sarutobi refused to allow me to do so, and what should have been a massive asset is now becoming an unacceptable liability. I have the same problems concerning my eldest daughter, Hinata. Had she been branded, it would not be a problem, in fact I would consider it a gain. But because she isn't, should Kumo or another village capture or kill her, they could get quite a lot of information concerning our Byakugan." In response, Danzo nodded and said, "It would seem that we both have a child at the base of our problems, Heishi." With a sigh, Heishi stated, "I would be indebted to you if you can help me get rid of my problem." Danzo fell silent and started to reflect. What was required was a means of recovering the Hokage's library, which is undoubtedly one of the most powerful assets in the elemental nations. Additionally, Jiraiya had to be eliminated, and either he or a puppet had to be placed in his place so that he could easily conceal the truth about Naruto's parents for all time. He closed his eye and drummed his fingers rhythmically, searching for something that could do both. His eye then popped open, and he grinned when he recognized it as Uzumaki Naruto. To plunge Tsunade into yet another abyss of despair, he only needed to have the brat killed. Naturally, she would return the Hokage's library to avoid having to deal with any traces of Konoha. After that, she would presumably drink herself to death and vanish into obscurity once more. When the boy's father, Minato, passed away, Jiraiya, who had become close to his student's son since they first met, would once more vanish into his work, taking the Hokage's place. In addition to having the Hokage's library at his disposal to use as he pleased, this would leave it open for him to take, either directly or indirectly. An unfortunate but ultimately necessary loss in exchange for greater power was that Naruto, a potential superweapon, had to die in order to carry out the plan. After formulating the plan, the man uttered the single word, "Come." Heishi watched in silence as 3 figures, 2 women and a man, knelt down in front of Danzo in an instant. Each wore a mask over their face, their hair cropped short, and they were all dressed in typical Anbu garb. The lone man wore a lion mask, the first woman a hawk mask, and the second a hyena mask. Each carried a ninjutsu with the handle on the right side, strapped horizontally to their waist. The one-eyed warhawk surveyed the 3 before ordering, "I need the 3 of you to locate and exterminate Uzumaki Naruto. It is imperative that you are not seen by his handlers, Tsunade of the Sannin, her apprentice Shizune, or Inuzuka Sume." The first woman, with her deep red hair, said, "Danzo Sama." Heishi spoke up and stated, "I want Hyuga Hinata to be executed if possible. She has been a stain on the Hyuga clan far too long, and this will ensure she shames neither me or the clan any further." Danzo nodded in agreement and added, "Your targets are Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Hinata, understand? The pink-haired civilian girl, however, is of no consequence. Kill her only if you must." The 3 exclaimed, "Hi, Danzo Sama," and then, as swiftly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving a beaming Danzo gazing at the spot where they had once knelt. Everything would be coming together soon. With a smirk and a bow, Hiashi got up from his chair and left the office, leaving Danzo alone. I must go, Danzo. I have a funeral to prepare and grieving to begin, as well as ensuring Hanabi becomes my heir. The Warhawk sat, oblivious to the tiny bug that scuttled along the wall, slipped out the window, and flew into the air. Gazing at the hero's monument, specifically the name of his sensei, Hitaki Kakashi let out a sigh. The fact that his former pupil, whom he had sacrificed to allow Sasuke to assume his proper position as a true shinobi of Konoha, was actually the son of a man he considered a father was the information he had discovered earlier today, and it was concerning to the man. Since Guy first told him about it, he had been troubled by the fact that the lonely, malnourished, and emotionally abused orphan who appeared to be the ideal footstool for his beloved student was actually Namikaze Minato's only heir. The damage from this new information was far worse than what Sasuke's taunts had done in the hospital, causing the carefully constructed fantasy he had built and nurtured for so many years to start crumbling. Unfortunately, the damage was much more difficult to repair this time because he couldn't just suck up and convince his sensei to let him continue to find comfort in his delusions. Specifically, because the man was deceased and because the Junin had mistreated and exploited his son instead. However, Kakashi hadn't allowed his fantasy world to be so easily destroyed after spending years in it. Additionally, he had multiple methods to prevent its destruction, and he was employing them at the moment. Denial and selective reasoning were his next lines of defense after he discovered that appeasement was ineffective. He had already persuaded himself that Tsunade and Jiraiya had forged the birth certificate in an effort to bring Naruto home by giving him the family he didn't have, because Kushina and Sensei's son perished in the Kyuubi attack. Later on, Sarutobi had made that very evident, and Kakashi was aware that Sarutobi would never tell them such a ludicrous lie. Which further undermined Naruto's status as Minato's son. Sarutobi had categorically stated that Naruto was an orphan, denying that fact to him and all those who inquired. Therefore, the blonde was not Minato's son if Sarutobi, one of the most powerful and adored Hokages, claimed that Naruto wasn't. In addition, Naruto was a dobi who was bound to become just another incompetent shinobi like Iruka. Therefore, it was best for Konoha to use Naruto to strengthen and increase Sasuke's shinobi skills. Even though it appeared to cost Naruto in the long run, Kakashi was doing the boy a favor by making sure Sasuke was a great shinobi so that Naruto could at least claim to have been the legendary Sasuke's teammate. Kakashi smiled beneath his mask and looked up at the sky. The time had come to get together with Sasuke and begin training him. With a sigh, Jiraiya turned to face the man in front of the Hokage's desk, arms clasped at his sides, sunglasses covering his eyes as his red trenchcoat concealed the rest of his body. Are you certain that Danzo and Hiashi have decided to have Naruto and Hinata assassinated by Ni operatives? The Rokudame Hokage asked, stooping his hands in front of him and glancing over at the man in front of him. Shibi nodded and said, "Hi, Hokage. Sama, one of my Kakaichu hidden within Danzo's office brought this to me, and they would not deliver false or inaccurate information." With a heavy rumbling sigh, Jiraiya acknowledged, "I know." He went on, "I thank you for doing so. Hyuga Hinata is a friend of my son Shino, to say nothing of the fact that this is not only treasonous, but disturbing behavior. In light of those facts, I could do no less than let you know of their actions." Shibi responded, and Jiraiya grinned as he, "I'm glad to know that some of the council remember exactly who is in control of Konoha, Shibi." Shibi nodded, "Of course, Hokage. Sama. I just wish I could use that information to string both of them up by their toes and take a rusty cheese grater to him. But unfortunately, your testimony alone isn't enough to have the head of the Hyuga clan or Danzo. Jiraiya said, to which Shibi responded. I understand Hokage. Sama. The villagers aren't very accepting of my clan and our symbiotic relationship with the Kakaichu. Jiraiya muttered, that too. It took all of his restraint to avoid finding Danzo or Hiashi and to practice his Rasengan on them until there was enough ground beef to feed the Inuzuka hounds. The white-haired Sannin replied, I'm afraid I can't tell you that. Nothing personal, it's just best if as few people know exactly what I'm doing as possible. Shibi asked, what will you do, Hokage? Sama? Jiraiya gave the man a smirk that sent shivers down his spine. The Aburame head bowed and turned to leave the office as fast as he could without running, saying, of course, Hokage. Sama. I will take my leave now and allow you to get back to work. The way he had unnerved Shibi made Jiraiya laugh uncontrollably. At least, as much as you could manage to make an Aburame feel uneasy. He grinned as he sat back in his chair and swiftly thought of a plan. The simplest plans are sometimes the best ones, and this one was no exception. Additionally, the room already had the required components. Jiraiya said, okay, you two, you can show yourselves. Two Anbu then materialized in front of his desk and knelt down, heads down. Jiraiya said, at ease. The two stood up, hands behind their backs, the first one posing the question, what do you need of us, Hokage? Sama. Jiraiya said, well, I already know you heard my meeting with Shibi, correct? And both of them gave a single nod. In that case, I have a mission for the both of you, Jiraiya said with a smile. Which is? The second person asked, and Jiraiya responded, Cat, Wolf, you are to locate the 3 members of Ni sent after the Sannin Tsunade and her group and eliminate them. Then you are to locate said team and join them to aid in protecting the son of Namikaze Minato and the former heiress Hyuga Hinata. During your time as bodyguards, you are allowed to remove your masks for their ease as well as yours. Is there any part of your mission you do not understand? Wolf said, no, Hokage. Sama. Jiraiya responded, very good, do your job well enough, and when the time comes, you two will be the ones to execute Danzo. Although he was unable to see their faces, he could sense the joy radiating from the two of them at the opportunity to carry out the task. Jiraiya smirked and said, dismissed. Remember that time is of the essence. Hi, Hokage. Sama said, Cat. As Jiraiya turned in his seat to gaze out the picture window over Konoha, both nodded and vanished. The ease of that nearly made him feel guilty. They would walk barefoot through hell for the opportunity to execute the man who ordered their sensei dead. He sighed as he contemplated the outcome and whether the two would have the opportunity to get rid of the old warhawk before it was too late. Quote. Wearing a black shirt with sleeves that reached his elbows, a black version of his Chunin vest over it, black slacks with a snake skin belt, and black shoes, Naruto walked out of the bathroom of a 3-person suite, gritting his teeth and resisting the urge to scratch at his hair. Even after being slicked down with a hair gel tube, it was still fighting for its freedom and attempting to crack the shell that was holding it in place. Sakura sighed from the bathroom and said, oh, don't be such a baby, Naruto. It makes you look nice. Naruto blinked and turned to face the pinkette, asking, yo, you think? Sakura glared and said, yeah. Besides, I worked damn hard to make your hair get that neat, so don't do anything to ruin it. The blonde smiled weakly and responded, I wouldn't dream of it. Fussing about with his coat, Sakura said, now remember, when you're with her, you need to eat politely, speak with your indoor voice, and don't get too rambunctious with your movements while talking. I know. Naruto replied, scowling as Sakura looked at him. He continued, I want you to remember that Hinata deserves to be treated with kindness and respect on this date, and you need to be on your best behavior. If you pull any of your normal nonsense, it'll not only make you look bad, it'll make her look bad. Really? Naruto asked. Sakura nodded as she replied, yes. I understand that you've been alone for most of your life and only had to worry about your own reputation, but when you're out with someone, your behavior reflects on them too. And you don't want Hinata to have a bad reputation because of you, now do you? No. Hinata seems a little weird, but she's always been nice to me, Naruto said, his eyes widening and his head shaking quickly. This time, Naruto shook his head negatively, and the pinkhead could see the determination to make sure Hinata had a good time growing in his azure eyes. And if she's always been nice to you, then she isn't expecting too much for wanting you to show her a good time, am I right? Sakura smiled and patted the blonde on the head, being careful not to mess up his hair, saying, "Good boy." The blonde gave her a silent scowl that resembled a pout, but he kept his arms folded across his chest and remained silent. Sakura said, "Oh, don't be like that, Naruto. I'm only teasing you." Naruto calmed down and smiled, asking, "Do I look good, Sakura-chan?" Sakura said, "Yes, you do. And don't you dare mess yourself up, because I worked hard to make you look so good." The blonde smiled brightly at her and said, "I wouldn't dream of it, Sakura-chan." This made Sakura smile as well. Since arriving at the hotel, her mood had been improving, and assisting Naruto with getting ready lifted her spirits to a level that was roughly normal. Sakura said, "Now, you do remember how to greet Hinata, right?" Naruto nodded, unsure of why dating had to be so challenging. "I thought it was just a group of friends going out to eat." Sakura put her hands on his shoulders and led him to the other suite they were renting, saying, "Good. Now come on, we can't keep her waiting." The blonde stood before the door, feeling a surge of anxiety as he slowly reached up and knocked. He saw it open, ghouling, and when his gaze fell upon Hinata, he was left with no other thoughts. She wore a pearl necklace around her neck, had her hair pulled back into a small bun on the back of her head, and was either wearing makeup or blushing subtly to make herself appear that way. She was holding her hands in front of her, wearing a black dress with no straps that accentuated her figure without drawing attention away from it, and wearing high-heeled sandals. Naruto stammered, "Hinata, you. Sakura gently poked him in the back, letting him finish, "Look beautiful." Hinata asked, Really? And Naruto nodded, saying, "Yeah, you're gorgeous." Hinata's blush subtly darkened as Naruto extended an arm to her. She accepted it with a soft smile and stood beside him, doing her best not to pass out. Naruto grinned sheepishly and they started to walk, the Hyuga having to make sure Hinata put one foot firmly in front of the other so she wouldn't trip over them. "They sure make a cute couple, don't they?" Shizune sighed as she watched the two go. Tsunade wiped her eyes dry and grinned softly, saying, "Yeah. Reminds me of my time with Dan. The good memories, letting me remember why I loved the goof." Sume gave a sad face. "I remember my first date with Kiru. Big idiot managed to trip over his own feet while we were walking to the restaurant. But he managed to make the mistake look so adorable, and was so cute when he got up embarrassed. Don't know how, but he managed to not only get me to fall in love with him, but also go through pregnancy twice." Nodding, Tsunade said, "Listen to us." Reminiscing like a couple old women in the nursing home. Then she laughed. The Inuzuka matriarch became extremely anxious when Sume said, "Well, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not ready for the nursing home." The former Hokage gave her a glare and then grinned.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.